Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started. Welcome to another day of Beyond the Northern Aegean Symposium. This morning, our session is entitled Building Networks of Trade and Communication. So we're going to start with Dr. Emil Nankov. Dr. Nankov is an assistant professor at the National Institute of Archaeology at the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. His main scholarly interests focus on urbanization, warfare, and the ancient economy of ancient Thrace. Dr. Nankov was a regular and an associate member at the American School of Classical Studies, and he was part of the Excellence Cluster Topoi at the Freie University in Berlin. He is currently the co-director of the excavation at Pistiros. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Nankov.
Good morning, everyone. Before I begin, I'd like to extend my gratitude to Professor Westcott for this wonderful opportunity. It's always great to be back in Athens, and I'd like to thank her for making this a great occasion and wonderful symposium. Back in 2018, there was a symposium organized in memory of Mieczysław Domaracki, who was the first excavator of the site, Emporion Pistiros. And in the course of this symposium, there was a paper by Nicolae Sharankov about a very interesting monument that he rediscovered. It was found much earlier in the course of the excavations, and Sharankov demonstrated that what we actually have is a boundary marker, a kind of artifact, a monument that you would come across normally in Greek sanctuaries from the classical period and beyond. So I was so surprised by this discovery or rediscovery that I wondered how many more clues we might have in terms of epigraphic and archaeological evidence from the site that has been excavated for now 35 years, just to check and see whether his hypothesis might be extended even further. So my talk today will be dedicated to such opportunities. So I would like to explore this and take it to the next level. But before I go into details, just a reminder for those of you who know little or know nothing about Pistiros. It's very centrally located in the western part of Upper Thrace Valley, and centrally positioned, nestled in between the Balkan Range to the north and the Rhodope to the south. Also, it's very well positioned in terms of international or interregional travel, being very much associated with what the Roman period would become Via Militaris or Via Diagonalis. And it's positioned on very close to the Maritsa or Hebros river. And this is just to give you an idea of the different excavation units or areas from the site that we've been excavating, as I mentioned earlier, for more than 3 decades now. Essentially, there are several compounds that have been isolated, and these are the names that you may come across in the specialized literature. Very often, Pistiros is referred to as veteran Aegean Vodenica 1, right here, which is the fortified compound, and there's Aegean Vodenica number 2, which is positioned significantly to the west, almost half a kilometer to the west, but it's still part of the same settlement. And there's another feature which has to do with the tumular burials. Tumulus number 1, which has been excavated but still unfinished. And this is the most famous discovery, which was by chance that took place in the mid-40s, actually before the site was discovered. And we have a Thracian tomb that is associated with that tumulus. So going back to Giska Vodenica 1, or the fortified compound, just a state plan of excavated features up until 21, and this is an aerial view from the southeast going northwest. This is the east fortification wall with the gate, which was excavated in the late 80s, early 90s. And there are a couple of buildings right next to the gate, and you have canalization here that goes out of the fortification wall. That's another view from the northwest, just to get a sense of the topography. Another important detail here, and it's something that is often mentioned, but perhaps not realized to the level that it should be. The site suffered greatly from natural disaster. In terms of flooding, Marica River is very torrential. It could be in the springtime, and because it's positioned very close to the area, close to the mountainside. So the site, geomorphological surveys have demonstrated that a significant portion of the site has been actually destroyed by the river. So what we have is just a small sample of what is otherwise a much greater settlement. And I'd like to emphasize on this because it will come up later when we discuss the actual artifacts. So you can see this is the wall, and you should imagine that this would have continued to the south like that. And there's a sharp difference in terms of height here, the denivellation. There's between 5 and 10 meters. So it's a significant drop. Now, going back to where we started, Pistiros is always, the site at Veteran has always been torn between archaeology and epigraphy. Right from the very beginning, the discovery of the major epigraphic documents have directed scholars' attention to the idea that it might have been ancient Pistiros, or Pistiros that's mentioned in the literary resources, at least in Herodotus and Stephanos of Byzantium. They talk about Polis Pistiros located in the northern Aegean, but Stephanos, writing much later than Herodotus, describes there are two entities, a town and an emporion. So the discovery of all these monuments, the discovery of this decree here that mentions Pistiros being an emporion led to the idea that the site at Veteran is actually that emporion itself. And in addition to the decree, we also have grave monuments, which led further support to the idea that Greeks actually settled there. And based on the lettering, these look quite early, at least late 5th, early 4th century BC. So you see the inscription here dated to the time just before and on the eve of the invasion of Philip II in Thrace. So this is the way this stone that Sharankov reinterpreted as a boundary marker was discovered, very high in terms of strata, almost close to the surface, and it was found by the Czech team led by Professor Bozek, and at the time they thought that it was a recycled block, maybe used as a curbstone along the road, but dated to the early Hellenistic period. But there were some traces of lettering that Lydia Dumaratska initially interpreted as being part, perhaps, of a funerary inscription, very much like the ones that I showed you at the beginning. Well, Sharankov demonstrated convincingly that this, in fact, is something else, and the inscription itself should read as Abaton. And I hope you can see the letters. He realized that there's a stroke here that would make this vita rather than raw. So it's Abaton, and meaning inaccessible. I've just thrown in one parallel. There are hundreds of those from the classical world. Normally, they were set up in sanctuaries, and very often the Abaton inscription is accompanied by the name of the divinity to which this sanctuary has been dedicated. So unfortunately, in our case, that part is missing. But still, it poses a huge problem, and it has profound implications, I think, for the history, the social political history of Pistiros, and this is what I try to explore further. So in terms of other clues, which have not been discussed by Sharankov's paper, because he's coming, of course, from the epigraphic side, but let's look at archaeology. So Professor Bolzek, over the course of the Czech excavations at Pistiros, he discovered a number of interesting artifacts that he interpreted as being part of a large monumental building, and not necessarily a temple, but perhaps a smaller shrine somewhere in the fortified compound. Some of those were found at the edge of the terrace that I showed you, the drop, the area that the river destroyed the site. So he hypothesized that this might have been in the area that's been destroyed by the river. Another interesting feature that these limestone pan tiles and architectural terracotta seem actually found in pits. So they seem to have been deposited in the ground at some point. So that's a first clue that can be discussed. Excuse me. Another interesting point is that there are some blocks at the site that seem reused again, and they're not associated with the earlier phase of the settlement. This is one block that I'd like to talk about. But before that, just to give you a sense of the kind of masonry we have, Čavdar Tsochev talked about Starosel yesterday. Very much this kind of construction in terms of building material, even joints, for instance, these L-shaped joints, they look very much like Starosel tombs, a retaining wall. But the idea has been that perhaps these were clamped together. It's been mentioned in the earlier reports that perhaps some areas contain traces of iron clamps set in lead. But what we actually have are prying holes. And as far as I know, at least I haven't discovered personally on the site, I haven't seen published example of two blocks clamped together. So in other words, we have a problem with this block, which obviously has here a cutting, which is used for iron clamps that were set in lead. So you have to come up with some sort of explanation what this block is doing there. Obviously reused, but what was the original building? In addition to this book, you see this is the way it was published from Vera Kolarova's meticulous study. And in addition to that block, Bolzek discovered several intact clamps, iron clamps with the lead around them. These are the examples. He found them in a pitus, again, keep in mind, in the early Hellenistic period. So most likely they were used to be melted down for some other purpose. And I realized when looking at this that this is exactly the same. So I hypothesized that this must have come from an earlier structure, most likely linked to blocks like this, of which we have one example, reused much later again. Now, okay, of course, this is a kind of clamp that people who do Greek architecture, they know about this stuff. It's the so-called dove tail clamps, and they're normally associated with public large buildings. Here are some examples. One example from Aptera on Crete is a temple building. And in terms of dimensions of these blocks, they've, at least in my eyes, they look very similar. And also I've realized here that there's another cutting that has not been discussed in the publication. So obviously this is something like that, very small, but they are obviously clamped together and it's part of a large building. Now, looking for other epigraphic clues, there's another inscription from the area of Pistiros that's been unfortunately lost, and that talks about dedication of statues to certain individual with his brothers, and this was deposited in a sanctuary of Apollo. And these people were supposed to be crowned during each festival, panegyris. And it's been speculated at the time of publication, especially Mikhailov corpus of Greek inscriptions, he hypothesized at that time, when this was published in the 60s, that this might have been Philippopolis, because simply we had no other candidate at that time. But Philippopolis is very far away from Pistiros, it's almost 35 kilometers. In fact, Botkum, the area where it was found, is much closer to Pistiros. And later on, it was picked up by Dumaratska, this idea that the Botkum inscription may refer, and actually these people that were honored in that sanctuary with the statue are associated with Pistiros. So, an interesting hypothesis that's already been published, by the way, that Peter Delev suggests that this unnamed individual is actually an Odrysian figure, Ketriporis, the son of Berisades, and his brothers. And then the issuing city was then Pistiros, and this decree was placed in its temenos, which would mean that the patron god was Apollo, if you assume that that was Pistiros. But perhaps the stone was brought to Botkum from the fortified house of the Odrysian ruler, perhaps Ketriporis, and the second copy of this decree was placed in the sanctuary itself, the sanctuary of Apollo, at the nearby Pistiros, for whose existence and possible location you already have some archaeological data. And this was actually expressed as a hypothesis put forward by Bravo and Hankovsky back in 1999. So I find this a really interesting coincidence. And then at that point, they did not discuss archaeological evidence, just epigraphic. Now, what else can we adduce? Of course, we have hundreds of graffiti, and 5 different types, and nothing surprising in terms of different kind of graffiti, and owners' names, dedication to deities, names on shirts, numerical notations, pictograms and signs. And back in '96, Dumaratska actually expressed the opinion that, noting that some graffiti with Apollo and AP, which are connected to the worship of Apollo. It's been expressed as an opinion, and she brought into discussion the Botkum inscription as well. Now, when I was looking for other possible clues, in 2013, in the last volume of Pistiros, the British team published an extensive report of a very interesting deposit of animal bones, which was discovered right here, just a couple of hundred meters away from the east gate, deposited in a very deep well or a shaft, almost 2 meters deep. And it was full of animal bones and a few ceramic fragments, and there's an amphora right there. So what Sus Talibras noticed, that she estimated the minimum number of animals, 22, predominantly of cattle. There were cut marks on the bones, and she estimated that the quantity of meat would be beyond 3 tons. And the osteological analysis showed that it was perhaps a public event of sacrifice taking place over several days, during which meat, mainly from cattle, was prepared and consumed and deposited at a single go. So perhaps this is an opportunity for us to explore this even further and see what was actually the context within which this event has appeared. And of course, we have this spectacular hydria from Cerveteri, dating from late 6th century BC, that has demonstrated different stages through which Greek sacrifice goes through. And from killing of the animal, and then cooking of meat, and a roasting of the entrails, and so forth. So what I'd like to discuss further are the appearance of two items on that scene, the meat hook and the cooking supports, like this right here, and there's this huge cauldron within which the meat is boiled, these two items here. And it turns out that we have evidence of those in Pistiros that have not been really talked about. These are two of those that were found. One of them is published by Dumaratsky in the late 90s. This is from Olentus, just to give you a sense of a comparison. This is from Thessaly, from Chaos, early Hellenistic town, and this is from northern Bulgaria. There's another example. Now, in terms of the cooking supports, there's been a huge problem with the identification in the literature, but right now it's been a common agreement that these are actually type of items supporting vessels as opposed to items that have to do something with metallurgy, which was one of the first ideas. So in Pistiros, they were interpreted in terms of the old paradigm. In Katincharova's paper, she talked about the possibility that these were related to metallurgy rather than being cooking supports. But now, in an article that's forthcoming, I'll try to demonstrate that they're actually cooking supports. So what's interesting about those is that they're found in the so-called semi-sunken dwellings, which date from the late 5th, early 4th century. That is the first phase of the site. And to give you a sense of the kind of structure that one should imagine looking at Olbia in the same period, kind of settlements that are normally associated with the early phase of Greek colonization throughout the Mediterranean. So apparently Pistiros is no exception. During the latest excavations at Pistiros, so I had a chance to discover even more in terms of context. So it's possibly another semi-sunken dwelling. This is a fortification wall as a channel. So from here we have these three fragments that have come out. And all the material, the fill, is related to domestic refuse. So these are the kind of vessels that we have at Pistiros with these rounded bottoms, and normally these were supported on these cooking supports. Here's another slide showing the variety in terms of cooking equipment that can be associated with this earlier phase of occupation of Pistiros, with this piraunoi, spouted hutri, and these baking devices. Now, the latest clue came after a geophysical survey that we conducted 2 years ago with our colleagues from Brno University. Managed to survey extensive areas around Pistiros, here marked in red, of 24 hectares with a magnetometer. And interesting anomalies that we came across, and one of those is situated right here west of Pistiros. As I mentioned at the beginning, that's the so-called Aegean Vodenica number 2. And our colleagues directed their attention to this feature, which they think is from anthropogenic activity, and there's most likely a building or platform with very significant dimensions, 40 by 30 meters roughly, oriented northeast, southwest. Of course, we need excavations to see what this is all about, but it's an interesting indication. Looking for parallels just from geophysical survey, it's very striking to my mind that in Krstović, in south central Bulgaria, we have already information about the existence of a Greek temple with two phases from late 5th century BC. It started off with a kind of tetrapyrgion succeeded by a podium or a temenos, within which there was a temple building, and these are the remnants from that building. We have Ionic bases, capitals, and antefixes, palmettae, and gorgos. And these are the dimensions of the temple itself and the temenos from Krstović. Of course, this is rather speculative at the moment because we haven't excavated yet, but it's very interesting that we have some of those already associated from the site in later context, in addition to the epigraphic evidence and the archaeological evidence. And just to summarize the conclusions, so the boundary stone identified by Nicolae Șerancu date from the 4th century BC, the early decades, provides epigraphic evidence for the existence of a Greek temenos. Second, architectural spolia from classical buildings reused in Hellenistic structures at the site. Architectural terracottas and stone roof tiles may also be indicative of the existence of monumental stone architecture from the classical period. Osteological analysis of animal bone deposit found extramuros testified to the ritual consumption of large quantities of meat, mostly cattle, within a short period of time, which was one-time deposit from the late 5th century BC. This is based on the finds. It is probably a part of the religious festivities associated with the worship of Apollo in the context of the annual panegiris mentioned in the so-called Batkun inscription. Some graffiti on pottery from the site point to the hypothesis that one of the deities worshipped by the Greek population at Pistiros was Apollo. The results of the recent geophysical survey conducted in the vicinity of Pistiros may contain vital clues, an unexpected opportunity to validate the hypothesis for the existence of a Greek temenos and or a temple located extramuros. The recognition of strictly Greek cult practices from the end of the 5th, beginning of the 4th century BC provide further evidence for the conceptualization of Pistiros as a settlement with mixed population, which also shows that the arrival of the Greek settlers at the site occurred well before the Thracian campaigns of Philip II in the late 340s BC. Thank you.
Okay, we have time for questions.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting, and I wanted to, maybe I missed it, about the history of the excavation of the site itself, and do you have future plans to keep working there? Because you do have, the evidence you presented is so,
yes.
Foretells great things ahead for you.
Oh yeah. There is a lot of things to be done, not only in terms of the fortified compound, which has been excavated for many decades. There's a lot of material that needs to be published from the old excavations, in addition to the material that we keep excavating every season. And in terms of this area west of the fortified kernel, there's also other opportunities there to continue. And last year we started even excavating to the north of the fortification wall and west from that pit with the bones. And the results demonstrate that they were actually occupying that area as well. And it's interesting that it again dates to the first phase. That is to say, it's probably related to that early presence. And it was very interesting that we had no evidence of Hellenistic material there. And also it gave us an idea about how difficult was, how tragic the fate of this site was, because we found evidence even from the Roman times and the 11th century AD from the medieval period. And we also have some evidence from the late Neolithic, but these are all without any significant architectural remains. This is just small finds and mainly pottery. And another factor that affected the history of excavation and the way we understand the site is the fact that during the late 80s, there was an attempt to turn this part of the riverbank into a field for vineyards. So they were pulling up soil from the strata on top. And this is how they came across the fortification wall, because there are huge blocks and they started breaking off the machines. So that's another thing in addition to the natural disasters brought in by the river. It's something that we need to tackle with, but again, there's a lot to be excavated and of course published.
Thank you, Emil. That was terrific. And when you showed your graffiti, that Apollo, I immediately thought of Zoni, and the graffiti that mentions that refers to a sanctuary of Apollo there. And I was curious if these are concentrated in any way, like the finds are from Zoni, if there's also graffiti or inscriptions that are like those at Samothrace and Zoni that are in Greek letters, but maybe Thracian language. This is going to be a very exciting possible parallel.
Yeah, this is one of the strengths of evidence we have, and it, as we know, we expect the corpus, the publication of all this graffiti from Lydia Dumaratska, and she's published over the years a number of important articles, hundreds of graffiti. Of course, we have Thracian names. She's attested a number of those, like Sutis and Spokis and so forth. But it's difficult to infuse just one letter, of course. Of course, there are other examples I didn't mention during the presentation. Because of the so-called Pistiros inscription, the formula, both parties, they use Dionysus as the common divinity guaranteeing the agreement. And it's been a hypothesis in the literature that perhaps they abide by Dionysus because it was a sort of a divinity that both parties could relate to. I mean, this was Denis Dimitriou's idea. Of course, there are a number of graffiti with like theophoric names. I showed some of those, Dionysius, for example. But I think there's more compelling evidence, in addition to the graffiti themselves, that would demonstrate that there's a worship directed to Apollo. And in terms also of thinking where these people came from, I didn't mention, the Pistiros inscription mentions Apollonia, Maronea, and Tassos. So Apollonians are their Ionians. So all the inscriptions from the site have Ionic dialect. That's another, I think, important point to be made if you think about Apollo as being the main divinity. So I've just sketched out the different areas that we might go into and trying to make sense of such an important discovery that Sharankov made. Because this stone was lying on the ground and they reused it, and actually it was face down. I mean, you can do this what you want, but it's very important that this was part of an entity of architectural space that has nothing to do with Thracians. And this is the kind of things that we need in order to re-examine Domaratsky's idea about this being a Greek trading post within the heart of Thrace. And if you look around, what I've tried to do, hopefully successfully today, looking at other archaeological clues, I think that this is becoming even a bigger monster than what it looked if you just take Sharankov's Abaton inscription.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed your presentation, putting together all these evidences. And so, as I understand, you're suggesting that Apollo and other divinities were worshipped at this site, at least goes back to classical period. And so is there any evidence that for post-Greek and Hellenistic period of worship of such deities in the site or neighborhood?
Yeah, thank you for the question. This is a great point. I should have emphasized on this. It's interesting that the chronology is clear. Looking at the letters and looking at deposits, it's definitely late 5th, early 4th. And these things were used. I didn't point out that the funerary stones, the tombstones, are actually, one was found as a block within the wall. And this sacred monument, the abaton, the boundary marker, was lying face down. So, and this is happening 100 years later. So at some point, something must have happened for them to start reusing all this material that's been around. I mean, we don't know where this temple, if there was a temple, I'm convinced that there was, but where exactly it is, but they apparently took this stuff and reused it very significantly in the later period. But to answer a question in terms of actual archaeological evidence, it's difficult to say what kind of worship took place in the Hellenistic period. But definitely the site was taken to the next level, because when the Greeks came and settled, they were living in these semi-sunken dwellings. All of a sudden, the site turned into something completely different. I showed you these large buildings. They were afforded with roof tiles. There was a canalization. There was fortification. And this seems to have happened after Philip, at least in my view. And based on what I've discovered on the site in terms of actual deposits associated with the wall. So for me, there are clearly two distinct phases. And I think we are very mistaken if we think about Pistiros as a fixed entity in time. There's nothing like this. I think it was a fluid form that underwent changes depending on the conditions within which it existed. It took off as a place where the Odrysians decided, the Odrysian king thought that it might be a good idea to take advantage of all these connections that the Greeks would have with the northern Aegean, because this is where they came from. But then when Philip showed up in the mid-40s, something terrible happened. Apparently, they have to reconsider and issue a new set of documents demonstrating the new status of this settlement within Thrace as being part of Macedonian kingdom, now as a strategia. There were actually a strategos appointed before Alexander went to the east. There were three of those people who actually ruled over Thrace, and this ended with Lysimachus, who was very important in the region for almost 40 years. So Pistiros still existed, but I think it was very completely different from what happened in the early 5th and late 5th, early 4th, when they were under the wing, as it were, of the Odrysians. So hopefully I try to demonstrate that these are two different phases. It's the same animal, but still it shows different phases.
One more question. Based on the location of the boundary stone that you found and the orientation of the building that you showed with the geophysical prospection, have you looked for other areas, for the other boundary stones in other areas? Do you see what I mean?
Well, for now, we have I didn't talk about this. The fortification wall has been really shifted around by this heavy machinery. You probably noticed that it was just cut off. The area that I excavated, I started at the area where they just destroyed the wall, and the stones were just lying around. And there's a terrace of the river to the west that is heavily overgrown, but it's filled with stones from ashlar blocks of different sizes that Professor Bose carefully documented in the late 90s. And he had the idea that that's part of the fortification wall. So we still need to really understand this better and possibly even find other clues in terms of what you just mentioned as a possibility. But at the time, we had no concrete evidence.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nankov. Well, all right, we have to move on. So, our next presenter is Dr. Musa Kadioğlu. He is a professor of classical archaeology at Ankara University and director of excavations at Teos since 2010. His primary research interests center on Greek and Roman architecture in Asia Minor, investigated through excavation, 3D modeling, and architectural restoration and reconstruction. His books include Nisa on the Meander, Die Skene Frans des Theaters von Nisa am Meander, Forschungen in Nisa am Meander 1, several other German publications that I will not list due to my horrifying German accent, Roman Ankara, which was published in 2011. Today his paper is entitled, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Roads and Bridges in the Black Sea region. Welcome.
Thank you, Katie. First of all, on behalf of Turkish nation, I would like to sincerely thank to the countries and their rescue teams that have come to the aid of them. Double earthquakes since 6th of February in Turkey. I would like to thank Professor Bonavescot for the invitation to Athens and to the architectural interactions across northern Greece, Macedonia, Thrace, and Pontic region in the late Classic and Hellenistic periods, and for the organization IVCHAN. In this Getty Connecting Art History seminar, I would like to discuss briefly the roads and bridges in the Black Sea region. That is the southern coast of the Black Sea in the ancient regions, Bithynia, Paphlagonia, and Pontus. Although this seminar covers the late Classical and Hellenistic periods, the archaeological remains of this period in this area, in this region, are very limited and mostly belong to the Roman imperial and later periods. The foundation of the Ionian settlements on the coast of the Black Sea led to a fundamental change of the entire region since the mid-7th century BC. In this colonization, Miletus and Megara were the most active cities during the Archaic period. At the end of the Archaic period, the entire region was annexed from Colchis in the east to Thrace in the west. Afterwards, the trade routes were improved and relations with Aegean coast were established. In order to control the grain trade in Black Sea region, Athens granted Athenian citizenship to the tyrants of Heraclea Pontique, which was a Megaran colony. Even in classical period, the needed manpower, namely slaves, for the Aegean police were obtained from this region, especially from Paphlagonia. As Apoikia were Heraclea Pontique, Sinope, Amisos, Kotiora, Trapezus, the important cities on the North Anatolian coast. Archaic, classical, and Hellenistic finds, which were found in the archaeological excavations carried out in 1944 by Ludwig Butte, and then 1950s by Ekrem Akurgal and Ludwig Butte at Sinope, determined the earliest Greek colonization in the southern Black Sea region. This was confirmed by the found Corinthian potteries from the late 7th and 6th centuries BC. Apart from these early investigations at Sinope, due to the lack of regular archaeological investigations as well as excavations, the city is in other southern part of Black Sea area almost unknown. However, thanks to the rescue excavations carried out by various regional museums, some of those cities are meanwhile partially known. The heart of Persian Empire is linked to satrapies by an original system of communication. A network of imperial roads with sagging posts rest houses, and travel rations. One of them amongst these, the Royal Road, described by Herodotus in the mid-5th century BC. The Royal Road connected the Lydian satrapy Sardis via Gordion and Abdera to Susa. Another part of this road network under Persian rule in Asia Minor was built in the Black Sea region from Daskylium, the satrapy of Hellespont in Phrygia, through Heraclea Pontique, Sinope, Kotiora, and Trapezus, and further east to Bactria. Such roads under Persian control certainly had political, administrative, and military functions, but they were used by travelers and traders. Persians measured the empire's interconnecting main roads, namely highways, and erected stone monuments marking distance. Today, however, all archaeological remains or material on the northern part of the Royal Road is missing. From the Anabasis of Xenophon, we learned that in about the end of the 5th century BC, a large army on its return journey to Greece used partly the land routes in Black Sea region. Under Xenophon's leadership and encouragement, the 10,000 soldiers reached the march north towards the relative safer coastal cities on the Black Sea, and from there further west. It is known that a Persian tradition was maintained in the Hellenistic period, that is, distance markers were set up on the main road, upon the order of some kings. Unfortunately, not a single distance marker from the Black Sea region has been preserved from Hellenistic period. The kingdom of Pontus, which situated on both sides of the river Halys, from Amastis to Kolkis, thrived between 3rd and 1st century BC and was governed by Mitratic dynasty. Presumably, Mithridates I Kitistes took the title of the king around 280 BC. It is most important king Mithridates II Eupator managed to build a great empire that would collapse after 30 years of brutal wars against Rome. However, at least in Black Sea region, archaeological remains of road and transportation networks are completely lacking, despite the borders of the Mithridatic kingdom covering almost the entire Anatolia and the Black Sea coast in the 1st century BC. Amongst the campaigns of Sulla, Flavius Fimbria, Licinius Murena, Licinius Lucullus, and Gaius Cotta in the Mithridatic wars to Asia Minor, especially the campaign of Julius Caesar, proves that the road network must have been widespread in the Black Sea region. After the Mithridatic wars in Anatolia and civil war in Rome, Caesar came to the Pontic region and defeated Pharnaces at the Battle of Zela. The road networks that we were able to identify with archaeological and epigraphical finds and remains from the Roman imperial period should point to the road networks formed in the region during the Persian period and after that the Hellenistic kingdoms followed. However, with the Roman era, it becomes clear that the road networks reached all regions of Anatolia, as well as imperial territories, especially the milestones, bridges, and paved road remains, which were found in large numbers, occupy an important role in the determination of these road networks. However, what distinguishes Rome from previous states is that the road construction was conducted very systematically, disciplined, with unparalleled technical capacity. What lay behind it was the wish to control and maintain authority over the territory annexed by Rome. Therefore, the roads, milestones, and bridges erected on them should be considered elements symbolizing their sovereignty and authority. Highways were built to facilitate the transit of military troops as well as the commercial flow. On the other hand, secondary roads allowed the central authority to exercise its hegemony over the settlements. Such a dense road network left almost no spot inaccessible by the central administration. The Roman network in the 2nd century BC was reached to Byzantium by the Via Egnatia, which led from Rome to Brindisi, as well as by a short Adriatic Sea road from Brindisi to Dyrrhachium, and by the Via Egnatia from Dyrrhachium to Byzantium. Another main road, namely the Via Militaris or Via Diagonalis, connected the Balkans with Byzantium. After crossing the Bosporus, the main roads began in Chalcedon, today Kadıköy, in Asia Minor. According to maps by David French, 2 roads led east from Chalcedon. The main road was the Pilgrims Road. This is P1, this is the red one. From Chalcedon via Nicomedia, Nicaea, Heliopolis, Ancyra, Tyana, Tarsus, and ended in Antioch. Another main road to the east inland, the Black Sea coast, leads from Nicomedia, number F2, via Prusias at Hippium, Claudiopolis, Pompeiapolis, to Neo Caesarea. Parallel to this main road, the coastline road, this is C1, runs eastward from Chalcedon through Heraclea Pontique, Sinope, Amisos, and Trapezus. These roads, which run almost parallel from west to east, were connected by intermediate roads, each accompanied by a river, such as Philisis, Sangarios, Hippios, Pileus, Halys, Iris, Lycos, and Melanthos on the north-south axis, thus linking the cities on the coast with those inland. We owe to David French the maps of the Roman road system in Anatolia. He had a great part in the understanding of the ancient road network in Turkey, categorized the Roman period roads in Anatolia as highway, roadway, and trackway. Highways and roadways have the common feature of pavement layer. The difference between them is their weights being over or under 3.25 meters. Now I would like to move my talk to the bridges. Here I will discuss some imperial bridges on main and intermediate roads on the Black Sea region. We don't have any Hellenistic or classical remains of the roads or bridges. There are 2,421 bridges or bridge remains registered as cultural monuments in the archives of the Ministry of Culture in Turkey. Of this, 255 are Roman bridges. You can see all the map of the bridges, a lot of. I show here only 4 bridges from west to east. The first one is Kutluca Stone Bridge, Taş Köprü. Taş Köprü, Taş is stone, bridge is köprü, Taş Köprü is stone bridge, is always named stone bridge in Turkey, almost. The Roman stone bridge, Kutluca Bridge 1, which connects the east and west sides of Göksu stream, is served as a connection from the north shore of the Gulf of Nicomedia to the Black Sea, especially Şile and Agva. In Ottoman times, the name Taş Köprü, Stone Bridge, is given to the entire district. It was used from Roman imperial period until the mid-20th century, when the new bridge was built. Probably this road was hinted at in the Tabula Peutingeriana, but not executed. From Nicomedia points a village 70 direction Artane, a predecessor settlement of Şile. Taş Köprü lies 21 kilometers northwest as the crow flies of Nicomedia, so that one can assume a road station at the bridge. The bridge without cutwaters on the upstream side measures 4.90 meters wide and 22 meters long, is well preserved, and has been restored in recent years with the addition of ugly stone balustrades. You can see here. The large central arch of 5-arch stone bridge was built over the Fisilis stream, modern Göksu Çayı, following through a deep gorge. The river valley was completely crossed by 2 arches joining the central arch from the east and west sides. The bridge was built with large rectangular cut stone blocks, and since it was damaged over time, the triangular gaps between the arches were repaired with smaller rectangular stone using lime mortar. Like the following bridge on the road connecting Prussia's Etipium with the Black Sea coast, the stone bridge in Kutluca must have been built during the road building activities of the Flavian period. Originally, the cut stone blocks, with or without mortar, and the connection details of the bridge walls generally point out to the 1st century BC and 1st century AD in Roman Anatolia. The bridge at Prussia's Etipium. Like the stone bridge at Kutluca, another bridge is located at Prussia's Etipium over the Tabakane stream, one of the arms feeding the Hypium river, today Büyük Melençay, and links Prussia's inland with the towns of Dia and Herakleia on the Black Sea coast. These two bridges are not on the main road in east-west direction, but on the intermediate route in north-south direction, which lie on the main road from Chalcedon to Nea Caesarea, so F2, you see here. The road networks connect the cities of Black Sea region with the cities in the Aegean. The three-arched bridge at Prussias was built of cut stone blocks in pseudo-isodomic masonry, and it's 4.70 meter wide and 30 meter long, and has in triangular shape of cutwaters which stand only on the upstream side. During the archaeological excavation carried out in recent years for the restoration of the bridge, the remains of piers were found at the southern beginning of the bridge. We see the red lines, which probably belonged to a three-arched gate or triumphal arch, similar to the Sangarius bridge. The laying of the highway from Chalcedon via Nicomedia, Claudiopolis, Creteia, Philiopolis to Ankyras started in the last years of Emperor Vespasian, 78 AD. Many milestones related to this road network have been found. The bridge at Prussia's Etipium was probably built in the connection with this construction of the main road in the second half of the 1st century AD, after the restoration. Stone bridge at Taşköprü, close to Pompeiopolis. Taşköprü stone bridge is located at Taşköprü district of Kastamonu and crossed the Gökırmak stream, one of the northern arms of Halys. It is located on the road from Nicomedia to Nea Caesarea and has a width 5.10 meters and a length of 68 meters. The bridge has 6 semicircular arches and was originally built of cut stone blocks, but the restoration over the times has almost caused it to lose its masonry character. It was heavily restored several times during the Selçuk and Ottoman periods, as well as in modern times, in which rubble stones, lime mortar was used and new parapets were installed. The sequence of the arches, which decrease from the center to both edges, is different. Moreover, the triangular shaped cutwaters on the upstream side are quite large and uncommon for the imperial period. All of these changes to the bridge must have occurred over time as a result of the restorations. Although the milestones found in the Taşköprü district point out to the end of the 2nd and 3rd century AD. This bridge must have been built at the latest in the 1st century AD as part of the new provincial order of the Flavian period, since it formed the main northern traffic access between east and west. However, the travelers of the 19th and 20th centuries gives a description of the stone bridge of Taşköprü, which is fundamentally different from the design of the bridge visible today. Therefore, it can be assumed that the present stone bridge, what we now see, was built in the last years of the 19th century. the last bridge at Vezirköprü, Köprübaşı Bridge at Vezirköprü. In the Köprübaşı village of Vezirköprü, ancient name Fazemon, district of Samsun, had risen another bridge where remains of the stone piers supporting the Roman bridge can still be seen in the bed of the Stavros stream. Many Roman milestones of this road have been found in this area, such as Tepeören, Beyören, Ortaklar, Yazıkışla, Çayırözü, and Havza. It connected the main road from Nicomedia through Pompeiapolis and to Neo-Caesarea in the east-west direction, as well as in north-south direction to Amisos, which today are also the main arteries of the road system of Turkey. The earliest milestone found in Vezirköprü dates the road to the time of Nerva, 97 AD. Other milestones associated with this main road F2 from Nicomedia to Neo-Caesarea have been dated to the end of 3rd and beginning of 4th century AD. This bridge is 3.90 meters wide and 104 meters long, was built with cut stone blocks and probably has 9 arches. The arches of the bridge are not preserved, and above the intact piers stretch a modern asphalt bridge. It is characteristic of this bridge that the in triangular shaped cutwaters are built on the down and upstream side of the bridge. I hope that we will soon learn more about the archaeology of the region with the increasing research and excavation in this region by researchers at the universities new established in the Black Sea region. We can say that the architectural interactions in northern Greece, Macedonia, Thrace, and Pontus regions are only provided with dense road network systems for now. The bridges in this region do not differ from those in the Aegean, northern Greece, Macedonia, and Thrace in terms of their construction and the materials used. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have time for just a few questions.
Thank you so much, Musa, for putting together this rich evidence and presenting it in such a nice and clear way. Congratulations. I have a question about architecture, so for one. So, in fact, 2 questions. Can you distinguish the Byzantine and the Ottoman refection of the bridges, and how can you distinguish them? And the second question, would you think about systems of earthquake-resistant structures for these bridges? So, you know, seismic architecture or seismic-resistant architecture.
So the first question, actually, we don't, it is not easy to distinguish the repairs or the phases on the bridges. If we see, I show the first one. This is Byzantine bridge, the cover page here. This is close to the Vezirköprü bridge. It is from the 13th, 14th century AD. If we use, you see the masonry art, it differs with tiles, then we can maybe distinguish it. And then the form of the arches, the Ottoman period, they use not true arch, they use, how can I say? Pointed arch, and then we can distinguish this. Otherwise, maybe we can see the cutwaters in Ottoman time is very high and very big in comparison with the Romans. And but it is not always too easy, because the connections, the roads and the bridges were always used through the centuries. And the second question was?
About earthquakes. How did they make them in order to be stable during earthquakes?
They repair always. I mean, the earthquakes damaged always the bridges and the roads, and then they renew this always. We can see maybe only this if the masonry art or the lime mortar was changed, then we can see this, but it is not too easy.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this wonderful overview, Musa. I'm wondering, are there accounts of early travelers that have documented these bridges? Is there any early traveler account that speaks about the evidence and they're taking an interest in this kind of evidence alongside many other things?
Yes, of course. I mean, the early travelers mean 19th, 20th, yes, especially for the Taşköprü Bridge in Pompeiipolis. They give a big account for the bridge, and then if we compare what they mentioned, it is not comparable with this station, with this bridge. And then we have actually a lot of mention by the travelers on the bridges, if they are visible at the time, and we can use this.
Thank you so much. So we'll move on to our final paper of the session, given by Dr. Natalia Toma. Dr. Toma is a postdoc fellow at the Department of Natural Sciences of the German Archaeological Institute. She is currently engaged in archaeological fieldwork at Miletus in Turkey. Her interdisciplinary research is characterized by a monument-based approach which centers on urbanism and architecture of the Mediterranean, architectural decoration with a focus on stoneworking techniques, archaeometry, in particular the provenience of white marble, and the archaeology of the Pontic region. Today, her paper is entitled From Expedient Quarrying to Itinerant Architecture, the Hellenistic Marble Distribution Between the Aegean and the Black Sea. Welcome.
Oh, of course. Good morning, everybody. I would like to start by thanking Bona Westcott for the initiative of the Getty Connecting Art History program beyond the Northern Aegean that made this research network possible, as well as for the invitation to this conference at the American School at Athens. My presentation aims to discuss preliminary data, and I stress preliminary data, of a marble provenance survey of the architecture of the Black Sea coast, results that emerged from my recently completed project on marble dynamics in the Eastern Aegean, more specifically on the marble resources and the construction industry in the Ionian city of Miletus. I argue that the archaic, classical, and Hellenistic that during the archaic, classical, and Hellenistic periods, the extraction of lithic material for construction purposes was primarily expedient and relied on resources available in the hora, or in the territorium, or in the proximity of the urban center where the construction processes took place. Nevertheless, the distribution of lithic material on a regional scale is not uncommon in the Greek period, but occurs regularly as part of the donation practice for the sanctuaries, as is the case of the Colossus of the Nexians on Delos, or the treasure houses in the sanctuaries of Delphi or Olympia. In this context, it should be emphasized that neither the lithic material in general, nor marble in particular, was a trade good per se, but always part of specific architectural and sculptural commissions. My working hypothesis is that the turning point in the development of the large-scale marble distribution was the Hellenistic period, when the Ptolemaic, Seleucid, and foremost Attalid rulers began to use marble as a building material for decorating their residences and, in parallel, initiated a flurry of activity of sculptural and architectural gifts to the main Greek sanctuaries. I recall the examples of Samothrace, built with Dacian marble, but also the case of the Eumenes Stoa on the Athenian Acropolis, built with Proconnesian material. The building policy of the Hellenistic rulers created the conditions for large-scale production and distribution of marble architecture, which later formed the basis for exploitation practices in the main marble quarries of the Mediterranean and favored the development of the Roman marble industry. Due to the limited time frame, but also because of the incipient stage of the project, I decided to focus on 2 case studies. First, I will use the example of archaic and Hellenistic, foremost Hellenistic Miletus, to show the expedient character of stone quarrying in this period, and then I will go beyond the Aegean to the western Black Sea coast to Histria, both to shed light on the emergence of marble distribution in one of Miletus' colonies, and to illustrate the Hellenistic turn with the appropriation of new design models through itinerant architecture and non-local building materials. Miletus, a city that does not require a detailed introduction for most of you, has been the focus of my research in the last 5 years. Though my project was primarily set on the Roman imperial phase, the complexity of the geological setting of the Meander Valley, of the surrounding Meander Valley, and the limitations of archaeometric method on the marble provenance forced an expansion of the research area to include the archaic and Hellenistic monuments of Miletus, particularly its extra-urban sanctuary of Apollo at Didyma, that you've seen on the previous slide over here. Situated near the mouth of the river Meander on the southwesternmost point of the Latmian Gulf, that is nowadays the brackish lake Bafagolu, Miletus and its territory superposes the geologic unit of the Menderes Massif, a metamorphic formation particularly abundant in marble and artholitic material best suitable for construction purposes. Since the late 1970s, the region has received constant attention, started with Peshlo Bindokat's archaeological survey, who identified several ancient quarries, and continuing with the mainly archaeometric work of German, Kramer, and Borg. The current state of research sees an extensive use of local white and white-grade marble that was quarried on the shores of the Latmian Gulf in 2 distinct extraction areas named after the juxtaposed ancient settlements. The quarries of Heraclea in the east on the flanks of the Latmus Mountains near Heraclea at Latmium, and the quarries of Miletus on the southern shore on the foothills of the Grion. Other than the Latmian, the compact Latmian deposit, the South Shore quarries are disparate between the hills of Lefkabourda and the Silva Oliva site, a touristic complex direct on the highway connecting Söke to Milasa. In keeping with their location facing the Bafa plain, they are also referred as the Miletus East and Miletus West quarries, respectively. The archaeological evidence of 2 large extraction sites and 90 unfinished column drums, that you can also see here, but here as well, in the quarries of the Lefkabourda, abandoned the quarries, being assigned a significant role in supplying the construction activity in Miletus, and especially its sanctuary at Didyma. Nevertheless, the archaeological studies of German and Kramer that focused on provenance archaeological material attributed to the other district, to the Heraclean, the prevalence in supplying Miletus with the construction material. Therefore, for both Hellenistic and Roman period, the previous research assumed a massive import from Heraclea as as building material for the public architecture, such as the Bouleutheion and parts of the Didymaion. Moreover, the Heracleotic marble is occasionally mentioned by ancient authors in connection with archaic building projects, which seems to give further support to the archaeometric results. Let's have a look. In his 10th book of the Architectura, Vitruvius relates the anecdote of Pixodaros, a shepherd that discovered by chance the Ephesian marble supplies. It occurs just at the time as the Ephesians were considering marble import from Paros, Tassos, Proconnesos, or Heraclea for the construction of the Artemision, a project started 560-550 BC with the financial support of the Lydian king Croesus. However, the archaic exploitation of Latmian marble by the citizens of Heraclea under Latmos is quite impossible, since the eponymous city was not founded until 250 years later, when Pleistarchos transferred the population from the settlement of Latmos to his residence Heraclea. Now, Vitruvius is known for its extensive recourse to Hellenistic sources, and the Heraclean stone, Litos Heraclea, is indeed mentioned by the Hellenistic author Theophrastos in his work Periliton, where, however, was used to designate native magnetic iron oxide, a lodestone of probable Lydian origin and not a marble variety. Furthermore, Heraclea is a rather common name than more than 40 ancient cities and settlements around the Mediterranean shared. In absence of an epithet such as Pontike or Sintike, the absence makes it difficult to reliably assign a geographic location to resources whose name derives from such a place. Although further research is needed, my brief analysis shows that there are no valid arguments to connect the Latmian marble to the written sources that would prove an early extraction activity or distribution of the Latmian Heracleotic marble. Moreover, despite their extent, these deposits do not seem to have produced any significant economic or urbanistic effect on the city of Heraclea, either in Hellenistic or even less in the Roman times. The Athena temple is built of local gneiss with only the facade in marble, same as the agora whose only colonnades are marbled, while the 7-kilometer-long city wall was completely of gneiss. All this indicates that the quarrying of marble and the infrastructure, and I stress infrastructure, required for it were rather limited around 200 BC. At the same time, the neighboring city of Miletus undertook massive efforts to rebuild the sanctuary of Apollo or Didyma, as over 30 building accounts provide detailed information on the extraction, transportation, and setting in place of ashlar and architectural elements. Despite the strong epigraphic evidence that explicitly names local quarry districts as sources of the material used for the temple, archaeometric investigations carried out by Borg in the 1990s revealed that one of the marble varieties used for the portal, and I will show another for the portal and for the dodekastylos, originates from Tassos. This indicates that the demand for building materials in Miletus could apparently not be completely met from the local sources and therefore had to be supplied by imports. Indeed, macroscopic features, coherent isotopic values plotting within the field of Aliki, but also the microscopic features of old data and recently measured samples seem to confirm Borg's assignation of the marble of the North Portal rivet and most of the drums of the dodekastylos to the Thracian calcitic deposit. So you can see here, we can discuss later, this is the Great Portal, and here you see the samples that I mentioned, plotting exactly in the field of Tasso Aliki, and here you see a thin section and the differences between the other material. This is the local marble used, and this is the Proconesian that comes in the Hadrianic period. Moreover, in the Hadrianic period, and further serious attempts were undertaken to finish the construction of the temple, it was again by means of import, this time from Proconnesos, that the demand for construction material was covered. At no moment, at its almost 600 years long-lasting construction project of the Didymaion, whenever large volumes or special featured marble was required, did Miletus recur to the deposit of Heraclea, but used its own or imported marble. Column drums destined for the late Roman construction phase of the Didymaeon that remained abandoned in both Milesian quarry districts testify that this exploitation areas were not exhausted and remained active till at least the mid of the 3rd century AD. So you remember the slides I showed at the beginning of the presentation with the huge drums. Indeed, the archaeometric study that I recently concluded with the support of Donato Atanasio confirms the relevance of the local deposit and questioned the earlier identification of massive use of Latmian marble. A look at the isotopic diagram that we can discuss if you're interested after the presentation in detail. Used for the statistical analysis, the marble analysis of Miletus from Archaic, Hellenistic, and Roman period show that the local marble was the most important resource for the adornment of the Milesian public spaces. Throughout its history, including the Roman phase, Miletus behaved self-sufficiently in terms of supply of building material, with the sole exception of the extra-urban sanctuary at Didyma. Nevertheless, and that is something, the recent edition of the Didymaean building accounts by Sebastian Prignitz does not fully sustain the archaeometric results. But this is a huge topic, and if you're interested, we can discuss it maybe in detail in private. So, even though the archaeometric evidence regarding the import of Thracian marble is extremely coherent, this is not supported by the epigraphy. So we have two different fields of archaeology, archaeometry and epigraphy, that actually contradict each other. Yeah, but it's for my topic, it's not yet extremely relevant. Both would actually go. Now, let's move beyond the northern Aegean to Histria, to a late 7th century BC foundation of Miletus on the Black Sea coast. You can see on the slide an aerial view of the site bordered by the late antique city wall, and so this is the late antique city wall, and this is what we will hear talking about. And at its northeastern corner, the so-called sacred zone or sacred area or temple zone, which was the city's acropolis, where the city's acropolis was probably located in pre-Roman times. The sacred area has been at the center of the Romanian archaeological research in Histria for the last 70 years and has been thoroughly studied and published thanks to the activity of Dionisie Pipidi, Petra Alexandrescu, Alexandru Avram, Monica Margineanu, Conrad Zimmermann, and Iulian Bârzescu. On display, you see a plan of the sacred, is a plan of the sacred area with the main cult buildings from the Greek period and a photograph of the foundation of an archaic temple dedicated to Aphrodite. This is a perfect example of the type of building material used in the early phase of Histria's urban development. It is a very friable Turonian age limestone quarried near the city in the Babadak plain, as already noted in the 1990s by the geologist Albert Baltresch. Both the Turonian limestone and the local green schist are rather unsuitable for building purposes and suffer heavily from weathering. So you can, this way. You can see here some examples. So this is a temple of the Aphrodite. If we will ever visit Histria, you'll be disappointed not to see it because the temple is covered due to the bad state of preservation of its construction material. It's extremely friable. Yeah, among the archaic architecture and the adornments of the sacred area, there are only few exceptions carved of white marble. The foundation of the so-called monument M of late archaic, early classical phase, and 3 anchor stocks deposited as offerings at the northern corner of the sacrificial area. So you see here the monument M, which is actually covered by a late Roman Byzantine basilica. This is a monument M, a monument whose function cannot be identified, cannot be detected. Monument M is a cult building of unknown function, of which only its oblong foundation with a length of about 10 meters and a reconstructed width of about 6.50 meters is preserved. It lies directly on the bedrock and is orientated approximately in a north-south direction, as it is a case of all archaic monuments of Histria. Its wall measures up to 65-70 centimeters in thickness and consists mostly of irregular chunks of marble with no visible tool traces. It will be difficult to see it. When I visited it, it was everything overgrown by vegetation, and you can see here that is a monument, that are the its walls, and here you see the chunks. You know, it's just not blocks. It's just chunks of marble. I don't know. It's really here very difficult to size, but actually quite good to see that they are just irregular stones. Avram advanced a hypothesis of reused material from an early small architecture, maybe an altar, that was deliberately profaned or destroyed. Băsescu mentioned in a private discussion a possible fire as a cause of the stone damage. Both interpretations are speculative. Crushing construction suitable ashlar blocks to reuse them for another destruction is a contradiction per se, and therefore not plausible. On the other hand, fire strongly weakens the structure of marble, makes it friable, exposing its crystals. The actual preservation state of the marble used for the monument M does not sustain this explanation. The isotopic analysis of the material plotted on the diagram as green triangle indicates the provenance from the dolomitic quarries of Tassos Vati, an origin that is also supported by the microscopic features of the samples. My interpretation, and I want to discuss this with you, that this irregular stone material must have traveled probably as ballast in one of the many ships engaged in good exchange between the northern Aegean and the Black Sea in the 6th century BC, and was disposed in Histria, where it was subsequently used for construction purposes. The three anchor votives are probably of Cycladic origin and attest to the same kind of trade activity between the Aegean and the Black Coast, and there's the same pattern of traveling marble along with trade goods. So you can see here that this is a small kouros, and is also of Parian marble. The other monument that I want to bring to your attention contrast chromatically strong with the previous examples. It is a group of two pedestals of votive statues and two honorary monuments made of dark gray stone described in the archaeological literature and in the epigraphic corpora as black marble. They have been studied by Florina Barai-Băsescu, who collected further examples from Panticapaion, Olbia, and Phanagorea on the northern coast of the Pontic region, and demonstrated that dark grey-lithic material as support for statues and inscriptions was part of a regional phenomenon expanding through the 4th and 3rd century BC. The dark grey stone is very compact, difficult to break, and takes a black metallic shine when polished. The macroscopic analysis evidences a carbonaceous limestone texture, slightly clastic, as shown by the abundant white veins filled with secondary calcite, that might originate from the Margaritis limestone quarries on the island of Chios. I thank Professor Lazzarini for this suggestion. Along with Lesbos, Chios was one of Histria's main trade partners in classical period, as the study of transport amphorae showed. Apart from its origin, which can be traced with certainty along the Aegean trade routes, the main question is the meaning behind the choice of this visually striking material. Considering its regional distribution and the fact that the Greek colonies on the Black Sea coast established and developed trade and cultural contacts with the Getae and the Scythian hinterland, where toroietics was an important form of artistic expression, The use of dark gray stone can be interpreted as an imitation or a substitution for metal. Maybe we can discuss with Anka about this. She knows better. My last example, which most of you are already very familiar with, is the Histrian temple of Theos Megas, a Doric marble architecture dedicated to the Samothracian gods by a certain Pisistratos, a citizen of Tarsos. The paleographic features of the inscription carved on its architrave indicate a construction date around the mid of the 3rd century BC, a chronology that is consistent with the detailed architectural study of Monica Marginanou, who reconstructed the design of the temple and observed the recourse to Pergamenian models, as she called it. The erection of the temple occurred during the reconstruction phase of the sacred area of Histria following its destruction by Lysimachos 313 during the punishment campaign of the Greek Black Sea Police, a phase characterized by the introduction of new materials and new architectural designs. Both the Theos Mega temple and one other temple architecture of same Doric order, named Temple X, emerged in an architectonic context that was previously dominated by Ionic models. And they are both built of massive marble that was specifically used only for facades, while the remaining structure was probably erected of local lithic material. Of the Temple of Theos Megas, the Temple of Theos Megas was already the subject of archaeometric study in the 90s when Pensia measured the oxygen-carbon isotopic signature and compared them with a database of ancient quarries of Norman Herz, which was considered at the time the standard reference. The results of the statistical analysis were published together with a graph by Maria Alexandrescu Vianu in her monograph on the sculpture of Histria, showing that the marble architecture of the temple originated from Proconnesos. Since the commissioner of the monument was a Thracian citizen, and this North Aegean island not only had extensive marble deposits, but also repeatedly supplied the building material for the construction of the Great Gods Sanctuary at Samothrace, as we know from the work of Bona Westcott and Yannis Maniatis, the archaeological research has since been skeptical about the Proconnesian origin of this Doric temple facade at Histria. Indeed, if you look here, a macroscopic expertise of the material evidences gray irregular spots that are rather common feature of the Thracian and not of the Proconnesian marble. Nevertheless, it has to be emphasized that this kind of chromatics or pattern vary extremely within one and the same deposit and are therefore selten diagnostic. The isotopic signature, the isotopic signature of the 3 marble samples that I took from the pediment, 1 cima block and a column drum, plot all in a zone of the overlapping fields characterizing the deposit of Proconnesos and Tassos Aliki. The provenance, the key to understanding the provenance, is offered by the mineropetrographic analysis that shows the very typical mortar fabric of Proconnesian marble and also the specific sutured boundaries and the strong interlocking of its crystals. It can be stated with a high degree of certainty that the marble of the Doric architecture commissioned by a Thracian in Histria is of Proconnesian origin. Same is the case of the Doric architecture of the so-called Temple X. So you can see it here. Yeah, this is a problem. They overlap. This is the field of Tassos Aliki here in green, and the black one is a field of Proconnesos 1. And if you see the red rectangles here, I plotted not only my samples but also the samples of Alexandrescu Vianu. And they, of course, vary. Some of them are just outside, of the Aliki plot. But if you compare, that's how the thin sections of the monument look like. And if you compare them with Proconnesos and with Aliki, there is absolutely no doubt that this marble is Proconnesos. So we have to accept this provenance. Yeah. The itinerant architecture erected in the sacred area of Histria in Hellenistic time is therefore carved of marble from the island of Proconnesos that is indeed mentioned in several ancient texts as source of marble supply for construction purposes, as I already mentioned in this lecture, the case of the Artemision of Ephesus. Nevertheless, the exact circumstances of the marble exploitation on Proconnesos prior to the Roman period remain unknown. The island belonged most probably to the Hora of Cyzicus and started its large-scale exploitation in the Hellenistic period when it became the main supplier of construction material for the Attalid program in Pergamon and from their donations. Among them, the famous Eumenestoa, one example of itinerant architecture built by Pergamenian craftsmen of Proconnesian marble and erected on the Athenian Acropolis, as Manolis Kores showed in one of his famous articles. The political alliance between the Attalids and Cyzicus by the marriage of Apollonius by Attalos I could have facilitated the access of Pergamon constructors and entrepreneurs and architects to the marble supplies of the island and created the premises for the distribution of marble architecture of Pergamon design in the Mediterranean. To sum up, the architectural construction phase of the Histrian Acropolis relied primarily on local resources. Marble was used most probably unintentionally as a building material. Non-local material occurs in cult contexts in this period, but only sporadically for votives such as the anchor stock or one small kuros. No marble imports from Miletus are documented. The Hellenistic period represents the turning point in the construction tradition of Histria by introducing new designs and new materials in its architectural expression. Before that, I'd like to thank a lot of people that support me in this project. In this case, I will stress once again the support of Iulian Băsescu that invited me to study the marble from Histria. The other colleagues are related to my Milesian project and other German Research Foundation, the DIE, colleagues in Turkey, in Berlin, and a lot of archaeometrists. I want to thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Natalia. Great work. I want to ask you, just to make sure I understood well, the inscriptions you showed from Istria, they're made of local marble, or you accept Lorenzo's identification as here?
It's not local marble. There is no marble in the region of Histria. There is only limestone. So this is a limestone, a dark gray limestone that probably comes from Chios. This is the so-called Bijo Antico, which is actually very popular in Roman time, and it also is quarried both on Chios but also on Lesbos. Yeah, but the Lesbian one looks different.
Okay,
yeah?
So this is imported marble.
It's imported marble
for Istria. Do you know if there is any work done on the reliefs? On the Istrian reliefs?
Yes, there is the work of Maria Alexandrescu Vianu. There is a monograph.
On analysis of marble, I mean.
No, analysis of marble in Histria. No, there is no. There is this work. This is work of Maria Alexandrescu Vianu, the monograph. Yeah, and she worked with Pentia. Yeah, and there is a graph, and there is also a table with a marble identification, but you cannot always follow what is actually the reason for assigning a piece of marble to, I don't know, Tassos or Proconnesos.
But there's no analysis done. That's what I mean. It's only optical analysis.
They took samples. They took samples. They analyzed the samples, but they didn't plot it the isotopic measurements. They plotted just. They published only a graph.
Okay. All right. Thank you, because the reliefs are also something to be tested, I guess.
Yes, but you know,
it's important.
Yes, it's important, of course. You know, I've done so much marble provenancing, and I think I can tell you it's either Proconnesos, Paros, or Tassos. So, and it's mostly you recognize it because the point of it, we always think it's an economic we always talk about marble trade and give to this distribution of lithic material a commercial value, but it is actually what travels is the work of art. It's architecture that, or the architecture. It's not the marble per se, the material. This is a phenomenon. This is something that develops and develops through the time, and it's a Roman phenomenon, yeah, marble trade, trading material per se for decorative purposes. Mm-hmm. But in the Greek period, everything is just part of commissions. It is a work of art or sculpture or relief or an architecture. So it's not the material that travels, yeah?
You mean it's ready-made? It's already made and travels?
If we take the example of the Eumeni Stoa, it was already done when traveled. Yes.
Yeah.
It depends, because in Histria, who should have carved the Theos Megas temple? It must be done at a certain degree. So it must be traveling architecture, itinerant architecture.
Okay, so the reliefs are a different issue because they are probably done locally.
I don't think
that
so.
The reliefs were.
Yes, of course, it's not impossible. It's not impossible to if you are a skilled craftsman to transpose models from limestone to marble. It would not be impossible, but I don't think it is the common way. I think actually that maybe artisans traveled along with the marble and carve it on spot, but it's not just marble.
Thank you, great talk. And certainly in the archaic period, I have the impression that it's the artisan who is traveling and being commissioned, and that material comes with them. Just a small question. Has the Milesian signature been identified in other places besides the local examples?
So the Milesian signature, so if Milesian marble was ever exported? No, this is a point. This is actually one of the most interesting results of my project, that cities mostly have an autark attitude towards lithic resources. Yeah, so that they are looking for quarries that they exploit just in case that they need this material, and they first look in the surroundings within their own hora, and this is something very interesting that is actually stated by all inscriptions, and these inscriptions from Didyma are very important because they actually show that the Milesian paid that there are no expenses for the marble material, so it must come from their own hora. And Miletus actually did my idea with Histria was, because I had difficulties in understanding the marble of Miletus archaeometrically, I thought, let's go in a colony and see if the material, which is probably important, if there is some material from Miletus that could help me to understand what I have here better. But there is no single piece of exported Milesian marble at Histria. And otherwise, maybe if we have, like, I don't know, works of art, there are Milesian artisans, there are architects involved also in the construction of the Artemision. Yeah. Of course, maybe marble traveled, but not as such, and always part of a commission.
Thank you for the very interesting talk. I would like to follow from this idea that marble travels with artists, and you mentioned the use of Thracian marble at Didyma due to insufficiency of local marble, and I was wondering, is it possible that Thracian was actually preferred because of its specific properties, because the artists, because the carvers were used to work with this marble?
Thank you for the question. It is a long talk, and originally had like a section in my paper on that I took out because I thought it would be too long at the end. The problem is we have these inscriptions, yeah, and the inscriptions state clearly that the marble was local, yeah, so there are no expenses for material. And we know from the work of Sebastian Prignitz in Epidaurus, for example, then in the case of imports, you have them listed, yeah. Of course, it's part of a commission, but if it's imported from somewhere else, you have to pay for it. Everything what is listed in the Didymaean inscriptions is the work, yeah, it's actually the payment for the temple slaves or for the people involved in constructing the monument. So this is the epigraphic part. The archaeometric part, if you visit Didyma, you will be surprised to see one particular marble called in jargon Zucker marble, so sugar marble, because it has really big crystals. And this is this marble here, and it's used for the portal of the temple. And Barbara and Gregor Borg, who studied the marble in the 90s, made one observation. So the threshold of the brick portal is of local marble that you can identify by naked eye. But the rivet is actually of this distinct marble, and they analyzed it and came to this conclusion. Yeah, and then this marble is also used for the dodekastylos, and their argument was that the quality of the Milesian marble was not sufficient for this monolithic pieces that were needed for the temple. Yeah. So far, it's everything, and of course there are, if you think of the connections between Tassos and between Miletus and the northern Aegean, we have this famous donation of a Milesian woman on Samothrace, a case of an architecture where you have the use of Thracian marble. So you would find historical arguments, yeah, for this connection and for this possibility. But we have the 30 inscription, and nowhere there's any mention of a commission of or any expenses for imported material. And you have this 190, when Barbara Borg had presented this hypothesis with the import of Tassos marble, the chronology of the temple and of the inscriptions was different one. But now we have this built around 190 BC, and then they continue the construction of the dodekastylos 160 BC. So we basically have over 30 years regularly imports from Tassos at Didyma that finds at Miletus, because Didyma doesn't exist, Didyma belongs to Miletus, no, that finds no written, no written record in the. Of course, one can say maybe it's a supplementary donation, maybe it was, I don't know, inscribed on another stelae or whatsoever. But it is striking because first we know exactly it is local, yeah. The inscriptions state that the material is local, and second, there is no evidence, yeah? So, yeah, Tassos, I don't know. It's up to you to decide what to what you want to give credit to the epigraphic sources or to the archaeometric ones. This will be a huge discussion, yeah.
It looks like we could continue this discussion for quite a while, but in order to make sure people can be a little bit caffeinated for the next panel, we will wrap up here. And Bana, we have about 10 minutes for coffee, or? Okay, so if we could be back at 5 past the hour. And let's thank our panelists once more.
All right. I hope everyone has had their sip of coffee. We are returning for our next session of the day, tomb architecture and interior design. Our first speaker of this session is Dr. Nadezhda Nalimova, who is an assistant professor of art history at Lomonosov Moscow State University, where she earned her PhD in art history in the Department of the History of Art. Her research interests are primarily focused on Greek architecture and its decoration, both sculptural and painted, questions of style, iconography, semantics, and the genesis of monumental decorative forms. Her talk today is titled Two Hellenistic Painted Tombs of the Cimmerian Bosporus and Their Macedonian Prototypes, Liminality and Hero Cult.
Thank you very much. So, I am going to discuss Bosporan and Macedonian funeral painting in connection with a quite complex problem, the phenomenon of posthumous heroization in the Hellenistic era and its reflection in the funeral iconography. Heroic motifs could be integrated into the funeral architecture with the help of different instruments, one of which is, of course, painting. In particular, by means of illusionistic decoration, the chamber's interior could have been transformed into a kind of enclosure, referring to the heroic cult. This is the case for the two Bosporan tombs under discussion. Both of them were found in Taman Peninsula, thus in the Asian part of Cimmerian Bosporus. These are the tomb from the first or great barrow of Vasyurinskaya Gora, or Vasyurinskaya Mound, close to the east coast of the Taman Bay, and the sepulchre near Napa, ancient Gargippia. The first barrow of Vasyurinskaya Gora was excavated in 1868-1872 by Waldemar von Tiesenhausen and Alexander Lutsenko. The watercolor drawings of the interior and also the plan and section of the tomb were made by Fyodor Gross at that time. The crypt was reopened for additional examination in June of 1907 by Vladislav Shkorpil and again in 1908. Thus, Professor Mikhail Rostovtsev had an opportunity to investigate the painting. At that stage, the watercolor drawings of the burial chamber were made by Mstislav Farmakovsky, the brother of famous archaeologist, as well as the black and white photos. Unfortunately, already in 1907, the state of the murals was quite poor, as Shkorpil testified. You can see his report on the screen. And already before the revolution, this tomb, one of the most valuable painted tombs of Bosporus, had completely perished. The second tomb was discovered by Nikolai Veselovsky in 1908, not far from Anapa, and it still exists. But this long-suffering tomb was dismantled and reassembled several times. What you see on the screen in the bottom is the latest reconstruction of 2018. But again, the wall paintings were completely lost during the early Soviet period. All that we have is black and white photos of the interiors and as well as the watercolor drawing of the wall from the burial chamber, again by Mstislav Farmakovsky. The most detailed description and analysis of these monuments belong to Mikhail Rostovtsev, who personally examined these murals. However, after his famous book, Antique Decorative Painting in the South of Russia, of 1913-1914, very few attempts to analyze this decoration have been taken. Of course, the tombs itself and their grave goods appear in many publications in connection of different questions, but not the painting. The main reason for this omission is the complete disappearance of these murals. Nevertheless, it seems that we have enough pictorial materials and descriptions to get an idea of them and to feed them better in the context of contemporary funeral art and trends. All available data, the list you can see on the screen, allows us to make judgment about the architectural features of now lost Vasyurinskaya tomb, which is basically shared by the second sepulchre near Napa. The structure was deepened into the ground to the level of the vault. It was equipped with a stepped dromos destroyed between the time of the tomb's discovery and the subsequent reopening in 1907. The tomb itself consists of two rooms, the antechamber and burial chamber, both covered with a barrel vault. Both entrances had no doors, and they were just blocked with a stone slab, with the stone blocks. Thus, as we see, the architectural feature of this tomb basically coincides with so-called Macedonian type. And we have other examples of such tombs on Bosporus, most of them on Asian side, and including the Syndica region. According to Elena Savostina, who explored this issue, 25 crypts with the barrel vaults in total are known on Bosporus. Yuri Vinogradov, in his publication on this topic, gives a list of 11 such tombs. Distinguishing this typological line, he declares its appearance in Bosporus at the end of the 4th and beginning of the 3rd centuries BC, and defines the first Vasiurinskaya tomb as one of the earliest examples. This complex question about the origin of the vaulted tombs in the Bosporus has already been discussed briefly by Roman Stoyanov and Philip Saperstein yesterday, and this is not, of course, my topic, but I'll try to show that painted decoration and architectural features rather point to Macedonia and Thrace as a source of inspiration. In Russian scientific literature, the term Macedonian type is not commonly used in connection with the Bosporan tombs. This is one of the reasons, probably, for the certain terminological confusion which Vinogradov rightly notes. For example, the antechamber of the first Vasiurinskaya tomb is sometimes incorrectly called a corridor of Tarastovtsov, or even dromos, which is, of course, wrong. This mistake also penetrated into the foreign literature. The real dromos is what is usually named as stairs with stone walls. Actually, stepped dromoi are quite widespread, and we find them also in the Macedonian type tombs. Probably the most famous example is the tomb of Tumulus Kasta in Amphipolis, but we have also many other examples. Speaking on the Vasiurinskaya tomb and Bosporan Macedonian type tomb in general, Vinogradov points out the absence of monumental facades as one with the order decoration as a significant difference. However, this feature is not distinguishing. Macedonian type tombs with simple undecorated facades which reveal the structure of the vault are well attested, and this is a common feature even for significant tombs with interior decoration, such as, for example, Tomb B in Korinos. So the only striking local feature of the Vasiurinskaya tomb is the stone boxes on two sides of the dromos, where 4 horse burials were found, and this feature should have been of Scythian or Sindemiotian origin. Both the antechamber and burial chamber were decorated. As we see, they demonstrate the unity of the pictorial system. The decoration of the antechamber is known only in the drawing made by Gross, which Rostovtsev considered to be inaccurate. Indeed, these watercolors give a kind of artistic reconstruction rather than exact reproduction of the mural state, and the inaccuracies, at least in scale rations, are obvious here. The later drawings by Farmakovsky are much more precise, but by this time the antechamber had already been destroyed. As we know, the decoration was completely painted without any plastic modeling or three-dimensional details except niches. Niches are real, as it is seen in the photo. Such a system can be defined, according to Stella Miller, as a painted architectural style. And at the same time, this is a typical example of what is commonly called masonry style, or Zonstil, according to Andreou. In the antechamber, we see the imitation of masonry with alternating narrow and wide blocks of the marble with veins. Blocks are separated by incised red lines, type 4 in Andreou classification. In the burial chamber, the walls is divided into several zones. A low duct toichobat, then a course of white orthostates, again separated by incised lines, a string course of alternating black and yellow blocks, topped with a lesbian chematium. Above it, there is a solid red field crowned with a cornice exactly at the base of the vault. In the antechamber, the same cornice with dentils and cyma bearing the lion head spouts crowned the ashlar wall. The roof of this imaginary structure was decorated with cone-shaped balusters, which are sometimes called antefixes. Moreover, live birds sat on the cornice. In the gross drawing, they are sitting regularly on the lion's head, but Rostovtsev noted that this is incorrect, and the birds were sitting more freely in different parts of the cornice. The decorative scheme used in the burial chamber can be characterized as type 4, one of the most common, according to Andreou. It originates in domestic decoration, judging by the earliest example, which comes from Athens, but already in the first half of the 4th century BC in Alintos, both houses and tombs had basically the same wall decoration of such kind. It seems that type 3 and 4, similar in their characteristic, had become a standard for the decoration of Macedonian tombs in the last quarter of the 4th century BC or even earlier, and the tomb A and Katerini might be the earliest examples. These interiors are characterized by the chromatic contrast between the plinth, or sometimes orthostates, and the middle area of the wall, which is normally red. Of course, such type of Zondstil can be found in the tombs outside Macedonia in the late 4th and 3rd century BC, especially in Thrace, where the painted tomb in Kazanlık and Maglish tomb and Helvetia tomb demonstrate such principles. But in most cases, I know, these principles are applied to the different forms of funerary architecture. And in the case of Bosporan tomb, both the decorative system and principle of planning and construction and space arrangement coincides with Macedonian forms. It seems that the earliest example of such zone decoration is the first example or earliest example where such zone decoration is combined with the motif of the hero shrine is also found in Macedonia. This is the interior of the tomb 3 in Aios of Anasius. Here, the plain red wall is crowned with a painted frieze of rosettes and bucrania, which might refer to the sacrificial and cultic theme. A gray band and a painted Ionic schemation rendered in trompe-l'oeil technique completed the whole structure. These details allow to interpret the whole as some kind of sacred enclosure. The appearance of the shield in the tympanum resonates with the military and heroic theme which is declared on the facade. In the case of Assyrianskaya tombs, the feeling of space behind is much stronger, and it is achieved by means of trompe-l'oeil painting of the cornice with three-dimensional dentils. Cyma looks very voluminous, and impression of the sharp relief is given to it by means of two dark stripes from below and from above, and a white one in the middle. Lion heads are modeled by the blue and white shadowing. This is how Rostovtsev describes the painting. Such grisile imitation with the shades of blue is attested in Macedonian tomb of Judgment and Mieza. Here the painted metopes on the facade imitate marble reliefs. This imitation coexists with the real stucco relief in the frieze above. In case of the Bosporan tomb, all that we see is a pictorial imitation. Such an illusionism without any modeling can be attributed to the same trend as the decoration of the later tomb of Lison and Callicles in Mieza, which also imitates a certain structure resembling a pavilion. As in the Bosporan, as in the Bosporan tomb, some objects, the weaponry, are placed on the cornice. And there is another feature common to both these interiors, the neutral background, which creates some special ambiguity. The space behind the wall and between the pillars does not differ from the color of the walls itself. Actually, the cornice in Bosporan tomb looks like a trompe-l'oeil replacement of stucco cornices similar to those we find in Macedonian tombs. But the cyma with the lion masks normally associated with the exterior walls, and especially the presence of the birds, should make one feel this space behind the wall. In the decoration of an upper crypt, this impression of the temenos open to the sky got even stronger because of blue color of the wall. The wall itself imitates a different type of masonry with the courses of alternating narrow and wide slabs separated by the wide shaded stripes. This imitation is again purely pictorial. This style of masonry, type 6, was very popular in the Aegean, mostly in domestic and public decoration of the 3rd and 1st century BC. It is not at all typical for the Macedonian tomb decoration, except probably the casta tumulus, where dromos and also chambers interiors and even crepidoma demonstrate such a marble or stucco coating. We also find it in trace, for example, in Helvetia tomb near Shipka, which is dated to the last quarter of the 4th century BC. But in the upper crypt, the wall is crowned by a wide frieze with a three-dimensionally depicted meander, above which the cornice with a row of dentils and duck-shaped balusters is visible. A similar visual solution, yes, as we can see here, a similar visual solution with the sky indicating the space behind is found among the complex wall decorations of the wealthy Delian houses, for example. Such type of wall decoration was codified by the 2nd century BC in a complex system with several courses of various types of masonry and friezes between them. We have well-known fragments of such murals in Bosporus coming from the Mithridates Mount in Kerch. However, in the upper crypt, the decoration is much simpler and soberer. Not only the monotonity of the walls, but also mostly modesty in imitation of textures indicates a different taste. This may support the earlier date within the 3rd century BC. It should be noted that the usage of a blue background, for the outer space is attested already in the house of Plasters in Pella in the 2nd half of the 3rd century BC. The only Macedonian tomb, actually the only tomb I know where the vault is painted blue, is a so-called Phoenicus tomb in Thessaloniki. This is a quite early tomb, lacks any painted imitation in the interior, except trompe-l'oeil rosettes on the architrave. But I think that it might refer, in general terms, to a kind of enclosure open to the sky, considering the color of the vault. The appearance of military motifs on the facade of this tomb may also imply the veneration of the deceased as a hero. As for the painting of Bosporan tombs, we have no other figurative components except birds, and only in the first Vasurinska tomb. The symbolism of these birds is not quite clear. In the watercolor by Gross, it seems that all of the birds are swallows. But Rostovtsev emphasized that they are of different species. Analyzing this detail, he gives examples when birds are associated with heroes and their veneration, in particular Memnon's birds created from the ashes of his companions. But a more appropriate reference is probably the birds of Achilles. In many sources, it is said that the birds flew to his famous sanctuary on the island of Levka in the Pontic Sea. Some authors suggest that they should be white birds and associate them with seagulls. But for example, Ariane says that the birds were of different kind and they took care of the temple of Achilles and cleansed it with their wings. So this motif seems to be appropriate for the decoration of this tomb hero, let's say. There are no images directly related to the military sphere or the male vault in the both tombs. However, the fragments of the real weapons were found in the first Vasurinska tomb. Moreover, Rostovtsev mentioned traces of nails or hooks at the height of the cornice, probably intended for the weapon and other belongings of the deceased. And what is even more important, the furnishing of this tomb and its relation to the paintings are semantically eloquent. Unfortunately, we cannot judge the upper crypt where nothing remains of the furnishing. In the Vasurinskaya tomb, a wooden sarcophagus decorated with intarsia technique was placed almost in the middle of the chamber, thus in the center of this imaginary enclosure. This sarcophagus is not just an important attribute of the funeral rite, but one of the structural elements of the whole complex. In this regard, the decoration of the ceiling and the position of the niches are also meaningful. The painting of the vault featured a rectangular brown carpet with tassels at the corners and border of stylized towers. Nearly the same design was applied to the vault in the tomb of Lyson and Kallikos, and this analogy was noted by Stella Miller and Heraclea Brekulaki, but not by Russian scholars. The carpet of the Lyson and Kallikos tomb is mainly interpreted as a canopy of the structure below. But in our case, such interpretation does not make sense because of a different type of architecture. We have just a wall without pillars or openings. The corners of the carpet do not reach the walls, and it seems to be floating in the air directly above the sarcophagus. Perhaps this feature refers to a canopy over sarcophagus itself, or a carpet with which the sarcophagus was covered during the ceremony. Again, this decoration makes accent on the center and articulate the vertical axis. Three niches placed on three sides also emphasize this orientation towards the center. This feature seems to be unusual for Bosporan tombs, and I know just one similar example, also in the Macedonian type tomb. And it is also atypical for Macedonia. Niches in the tomb of Lyson and Kallikos were simple locally, intended for urns with ashes. This is not the same in the Vasurinskaya tomb. Actually, the niches and openings with such frames were widespread in domestic and public architecture, and they could have been borrowed from anywhere or emerged independently. But the closest composition with three niches in the funeral context outside Bosporus is found in Alexandria, in the tomb of Sidi Gabor, which dates back to the end of the 3rd century BC. Here, so-called cleaner room and the anteroom used to have 5 niches. 3 of them were placed symmetrically in the center of the 3 walls. And it is interesting that the motif of the enclosure and blue sky above also seem to be presented here. Moreover, the images of the birds sitting on the cornices or garlands are also familiar from the 3rd century Alexandrian tombs. Actually, we have many evidences of contacts between Bosporus and Ptolemaic Egypt at this time, so we should not completely rule out the possibility of direct influences from Egypt. Susan Bennett interprets these niches in Sidi Gabor tomb as false windows, but I'm not sure that this is appropriate for the Vasurinskaya tomb. Perhaps here the niches were intended for the offerings. Anyway, as we can see, all the elements of the tomb, both pictorial and architectural, are oriented towards the center, to the deceased. To sum up our observation, of the 2 tombs under consideration, at least one, that of Vasurinskaya Mount, revealed pronounced Macedonian features both in architectural composition and in the concept of decoration. Despite its simplicity, its painting demonstrates mastery in the chiaroscuro technique and trompe-l'oeil rendering of the object. Rostovtsev emphasized this high quality of painting and especially of plastering, a thin layer of excellent plaster, he said. This is also typical for the most important Macedonian tombs, but it is far from being so common among the Hellenistic painted tombs in Bosporus. The concept of interior decoration transformed into the hero shrine also seems to originate in Macedonia, as evidenced by the Tomb 3, Naios of Anasios, and probably Phoenicus tomb. But Bosporan murals probably fit better into the trend of fully painted architectural decoration, which was developed in the second half of the 3rd century BC. Practically in all publication, the first Vasiurinskaya tomb is dated to the beginning of the 3rd century or even the end of the 4th century BC. And this opinion goes back to Rostovtsev. Rostovtsev himself relied on his proposed dating for the pyxis found in the tomb. Later, this pyxis was dated to the mid-3rd century BC by Zoe Kotitsa. It is worth noting that apart from the great or first Tumulus, there was another important burial on the Vasiurinskaya Mount, the so-called Middle Tumulus, with the unpainted Macedonian type tomb inside. In this burial, a lot of evidence of cult was also found. The fragments of an altar, marble tables, and fragments of statues, including a colossal one. From the host burial of this tomb, the fragments of a chariot and harness come. Recently, Mikhail Trester suggested the dating of the late 3rd or even early 2nd century BC for all complex. It seems plausible that the tombs of the greater and middle Vasiurinskaya tumuli could not differ much in dating. And it is hardly possible that one tomb was created at the beginning of the 3rd century and the second one at the end. Therefore, it seems appropriate to move the dating of the painted Vasiurinskaya tomb to the second half of the 3rd century, perhaps even closer to the end. It is more difficult to judge the Anapa crypt due to the lack of findings, but the painted decoration also speaks in favor of late 3rd or even early 2nd century BC. It does not mean, however, that the tombs of Macedonian type couldn't have appeared in Bosporus earlier. The ways of penetration of these forms pose a separate problem, but perhaps it was a path through Thrace, and we probably should keep in mind the painted tomb in Calatis, as well as the smaller undecorated tombs of this region, which look similar to the Anapa sepulchre. And the well-known testimony of Diodorus about the resettlement of the Calatians, 1,000 Calatians to Bosporus at the very end of the 4th century BC, perhaps also matters because it could mean the relocation of craftsmen and building practices. Thank you very much.
If there are any. I found myself mesmerized by the vision you presented to us of this vault painted with a floating textile, a burial shroud, and how it may be interlaced with Consuelo Manetta's presentation yesterday, in which she touched on the issue of Pausias of Sicyon, the emergence of illusionistic painting and ceiling decoration. Yes. Do you have any comment on this?
First of all, I wanted just to congratulate with you, Nadia, because bringing out this document, that it's so difficult for people who are dealing with this document to have such a documentation. So thank you, and please go on with that. I think it will be absolutely interesting to, and of course, again, I'm very interested in this. I knew the painting, of course, and there is a lot, and of course also in Alexandria, I guess we have also such. So it will be interesting to bring together and to see what kind of development and transmission of this. I was also very interested because another problem that I'm facing is about this so-called, because then again the terminology, it becomes also a substantial problem there, you know, and you know the problems about masonry style, structural style, zone style. It has been called in several ways, and of course also the first Pompeian style that has created this absolutely impossible, and it's now well known that we can't divide about, but there is still this difference between an Easter masonry style or that has been called international style. And I don't know if you know also the recent book, quite interesting, about from Thomas Lappi, about the what he called the first style. So trying to go, and this is my question also about, I think what you are showing here is that the chronology of the tomb changed, no, radically from what it was, and the same is happening with us in Thrace. So I think also the Andreou important work on the Greek decoration needs to be now updated with all the data that we have, and maybe a new kind of approach towards the Masonry style. So I think there is a lot of room for collaboration. Yeah. So thank you so much. I agree with absolutely.
Yes. Thank you for this comment. I agree that this Andreou classification, I just use it. Okay, it doesn't give much, and probably the dating is controversial. And as for Bosporan tombs, there are a lot of mistakes in her book because it is confused. The two tombs are confused in the styles of it, and of course, yes. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadia, and congratulations for updating the information and the date. I would like to ask about the blue. How did they make this blue? And can this say something about the connections and so?
They make what?
The blue color with what pigment?
Actually, you mean for Bosporan tombs?
Yes.
It's impossible to say it because it doesn't exist, and we have no analysis of this color it is known just from the description, and these watercolors, that is all we have. But when we compare with this Phoenicus tomb, it seems that the color is very close. So it's made of black and mixed with white, as far as I know. So it's probably something like that, but it's difficult to say about the origin of these pigments or something like that. It's impossible to. We do not have such data.
Natalia, great tomb. Do you have a picture of the offerings inside the tomb, whatever was found inside?
Yes,
and can you tell whether we are towards the Greek world or towards the Egyptian world?
Actually, inside we have a lot of things, and I didn't put it in the presentation because just to make it shorter a bit.
So
but it's very interesting that we have a table, marble table, which still exists. It survived. It is kept in Kerch Museum, and
sorry, which was found inside the tomb or
inside the tomb, inside Vasurinskaya tomb, just in front of sarcophagus, as Rostovtsov described it, and. On the surface of the tomb, there were imprints of precious vessels, of around 20 in total, of different diameters. So this table was intended for, I don't know, for demonstrating or for these precious vessels, and it has a rim around the board, and the kind of channel on the side, so it seems that it was intended for libations or something like that, and it's really very interesting. And we have weapons and nothing from Egypt actually in this tomb, and this sarcophagus, parts of which also exists, this wooden sarcophagus, and ceramics and
you mentioned that the niches are for offerings, possibly.
Niches, actually, I don't know. We don't know for what. Just empty niches, but it was just one burial inside. They said, and it wasn't. They were not intended for
burial.
Yes, for burials. So probably it's some of decoration, just decoration as like look like windows or something, but probably for offerings. And I know just one other tomb on the European part of Bosporus with nearly the same arrangement of the niches, 3 niches also, and but the sarcophagus is standing close to the wall. It's not in the center, so it's a bit different composition, but the niches exist.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadia.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Tamás Kisbali, who is an assistant professor at the Faculty of History at Lomonosov Moscow State University, where he teaches the art of the ancient Near East and classical antiquity. His main field of research is the art and archaeology of Asia Minor throughout the first millennium BC, and in particular the development of funerary architecture and the spread of iconographic schemes in the region. His talk today is titled The Stone Table from the Naip Tumulus near Tekirdağ and Other Imitations of Objects in Hellenistic Tombs.
Dear colleagues, at first I would also like to thank Bona and her team for organizing this event and for inviting us, and it means a lot actually to be able to come here and to participate and to finally meet all of you. And I've already learned so much from the papers and the presentations, and I hope my contribution will also at least fit with the overall themes and might be of interest to all of us. So the Naip Tumulus is notable for its rich grave goods and the marble furniture that was found there. The tomb chamber held a cline, a footstool, 2 diffroi, and a table. And each of these objects is a close imitation of wooden prototypes, which followed, of course, a popular trend in the furnishing of Hellenistic tombs, alluding to the world of symposia and funerary banquets. The Naip table, however, goes sort of a step further and sort of sets in stone the layout of the plates and the cups as well. Nadia just mentioned that table that had the sort of just the imprints from the metal vessels. Well, here they are set in stone. Well, this feature is nearly exceptional in the corpus of Hellenistic petrified furniture. So this is this intriguing piece that I would like to concentrate on today. And I aim to analyze its compositional features as an object of sculpture, and also the semantic potential of such a setup. And of particular interest is the way vessels, or combinations of vessels and furniture, are integrated into or depicted in specific zones of these tombs. So let me briefly set the scene. The Naip Tumulus is a late 4th, early 3rd century BC burial in southeastern Thrace, near modern Tekirdağ. It was excavated in 1984-85, and the results were published finally by İnci Dağmen first in her comprehensive 2004 book in Turkish, and followed by an English language article in the American Journal of Archaeology. And in these publications, she gave a full report on the tomb's architecture and inventory, its possible chronology, with dating it to the last 2 decades of the 4th century BC, and also based on various factors, including a name inscribed on a silver jug. She also put forward a tentative identification for the owner of the tomb, identifying one of the sons of Kersebleptes, Teres, an Odrysian prince who, I quote Delaman, might have served and reached a high rank in Alexander's multinational army at the dawn of the Hellenistic period, and for whom the slopes of the Ganos mountain would be an appropriate place of interment, end quote. And there's also some more recent scholarship building upon Delaman's monograph, with some people who are sitting here today also approaching it, considering various elements and details. So overall there's this tendency to slightly lower the proposed date to the last decades of the 4th, beginning of the 3rd centuries, based on reviewed evidence of the Thracian amphora stamps and other features like the morphology of the vessels and furniture, which also might be slightly younger. Stoyanov re-examined the aforementioned silver jug, Daniela Grudieva considered the cline and the diffros, and Daniela Stoyanova the marble door slab, for example. So the tumulus is located some 5 kilometers from the shore, And also, of course, we always suspect that these tumuli were perceived as important landscape monuments, so they had to be built in relation to other significant points. However, we do not yet know enough about this region to be able to understand this, but it could have been connected to, for example, a road. We learned about the importance of roads already today, something going from the shore towards maybe Apri. And on the other hand, the nearby Mount Ganos here to the southwest was a sacred site attested in ancient sources, but however, this is still something that has to be studied. And the monument itself under the mound no longer exists. It was destroyed during the excavations. The monument consisted of a long dromos with stairs leading down to a single chamber. They were divided by a marble door slab. And the discrepancy in building technology and quality and the disregard for the initial proportions of the structure points to the hypothesis that the dromos was extended sometime at a later phase, as established by the excavators and also confirmed by other scholars. And it's also worth noting here that this strange portal slab is also in part an imitation of a double-leaf door, aspiring perhaps to a more monumental appearance. And the chamber was furnished with marble furniture, as already said, and an array of luxurious metal vessels. The banqueting set of silver was found in situ, set up as if sort of awaiting guests, on top of the places marked with relief depictions of similar yet not identical plates and bowls. So I will now just remove these objects and examine first this sculpted marble tabletop. It's a full-size rectangular table. The upright elements have fluted faces tapering downwards to a lion's paw. And of course, this is a feature that finds parallels with other early Hellenistic stone tables as well. However, the carved tabletop is a unique feature. The vessels are carved in low relief, but stand out sharply against the smooth surface level. Their shapes received only a summary treatment. Profiles are mostly ignored, but there are some details. For example, the impressions in the sort of a fish plate type depictions. And overall, their layout and composition feels very intentional. It is based on two axes of symmetry that coincide with the axis of the rectangular base shape of the table. One axis passes through the two fish plates marked with A and the two bowls B, while there's a third fish plate placed off axis, but adjacent to it, like right on it, almost right on it. And there's a medium-sized but very richly profiled, this is the most richly profiled table, plate C, that mirrors its position. So these two together mark the vertical or second axis of this composition. And there are two salt cellars, like smaller vessels, to maintain the overall balance. And this overall symmetry is disturbed only by this small flat element, this one, which looks like a coaster marked with E, but perhaps this outlier only stresses the symmetry of the composition. So the general former impression is that of an extension of this composition from the clinae towards the entrance of the chamber, which is the next thing I would like to consider. So the clinae, there was of course a clinae as well, the clinae and the table were placed slightly off axis in relation to the main axis of the dromos. However, the chamber is not particularly large. So this placement still allowed for a large part of the furnishing to be visible from the dromos, and of course it was also framed by the portal. And once again, this burial chamber is deeper underground by about 185 centimeters. Despite this elevation change, with sufficient illumination in the tomb chamber, of course, the couch and the table remained visible. And I would argue that the table had an even better sort of visibility from this bird's eye view from above the stairs than from the ground level. This vantage point offered a top-down view which could compensate for the relative flatness of the reliefs and stress their harmonic symmetric layout. And I would like to sort of take this observation to the extreme for this paper. So in many ways, this physical, built, carved configuration, the enforced point of view inside a tomb, They make the Naip table appear similar to the bold perspective they utilized in 4th century painting, and in a somewhat milder form, of course, later in Thracian murals, for example, in the Kazanlık tomb. So for now, I would like to compare these two monuments and the depictions of the tables. At Kazanlık, the structure of the wall paintings in the tomb chambers, or in the tomb, they dictate a particular dramaturgy. While moving through the dromos, the visitor can at first only see the contrasting and alternating fields of white, dark, and red, a topic that Nadia already touched upon a bit. And above, there is a baldachin of floral ornaments and the two battle friezes. Yet in this narrow corridor, the goal of the movement is still quite clear. It's the frame of the portal, for now, from this vantage point, occupied by empty color bands. However, upon entry, of course, into the tomb, in the tomb chamber, in the final chamber, there's this wave of images in the two friezes of the dome. And actually right opposite the chamber's entrance, the first thing we see, if we lift our eyes up, is the famous feasting scene, this one, in the lower frieze. But meanwhile, above us, over the entrance, a group of horsemen divides into two groups to hug the dome from the two sides, and finally both groups of attendants reconvene and reach the couple who are seated at a three-legged table with their feast laid out before them. And at another tomb, at the Alexandrovo tomb, we can follow a similar scheme, slightly different. The wall paintings, which were added during the second phase of the monument's existence, also achieve a staged and framed effect. The antechamber is filled with martial imagery. And by the way, to draw the association so common for Hellenistic tombs between war and hunt, the spectator almost has to kneel, because from the frog's eye view, to allow to combine the combatants of the antechamber with the hunting scenes, and the beasts in the burial chamber's upper frieze. But in a more natural, let's say, standing position, although the chamber is not very big, we see a different, more peaceful scene, a feast or offering scene with numerous attendants and objects. Unfortunately, this scene is badly damaged, especially its part that's not on this image, and details are hard to make out. But what I would like to stress here is the positioning of the banquet scene in a prominent location opposite the entrance, visible from the entrance, like the paintings of Kazanlık or the sculpted table at Naip. So let us now compare the two tables from Kazanlık and Naip, especially the way they are depicted and set. As I've already mentioned, the Naip table, everything is laid out in an organized, symmetrical way. The Kazanlık table looks more busy at first. There are loose chunks of food scattered around in a lively manner, yet still there is an underlying sense of order, an underlying scheme. There are these two bright plates anchored to the horizontal axis and mirrored in relation to the vertical. They also form two opposing poles. These two gray blobs that unfortunately, maybe mirrors, I don't know what are they. I wasn't able to identify these two great blobs, but as far as these amorphous blobs go, they are also set out in a very balanced, nicely balanced way. And to drive this home and to really show you the symmetric compositions of these things, I think it's interesting to contrast it to a very different approach in ancient painting from a different time, or ancient pictorial culture, to contrast it with the erudite and playful wit of the Asaratosoikos compositions in Hellenistic and Roman, of this Hellenistic and Roman mosaic type. And also, by the way, similarly, the other, let's say, still life elements in the Kazanlık murals, they seek the balance between hierarchical legibility and naturalistic illusionary persuasion. Sure, like these pomegranates and other fruits, they are well modeled with some gradient colors and with light reflexes, but they are stacked in a neat, symmetrical pyramid. And just to bring in another anachronistic juxtaposition, a Roman still life from the other end of this spectrum, from Pompeii, which is Kazanlık ultimately prefers this hierarchical legibility and rigor. And but continuing with these cross-cultural comparisons, and of course the Egyptian comparisons, which were already discussed yesterday and just recently during the previous thing, I would like to address this another related topic. It's been pointed out before that the Naip tables reliefs are unique in Hellenistic stone furniture, but already Ingi Deleman suggested an interesting way. She compared them to a specific type of ancient Egyptian offering tables, which existed, by the way, from the Old Kingdom or even earlier, up until Roman and Hellenistic times. And she offered that these tables could have inspired, but not necessarily directly influenced, the Naip table's unusual configuration. This hypothesis in Deleman's work also ties in with her proposal for the owner, because she thought that Prince Teres would have taken part in Alexander's campaign and visited Egypt. I won't comment on this now. And indeed, on a formal level, there are similarities. They are stone slabs decorated in low relief, though technically the Egyptian offering tables mostly are with sunken reliefs, with depictions of vessels and sacrificial offerings. And in both examples, the compositions tend to be strictly symmetric, oftentimes doubling up on the same image on both sides. Yet overall, I feel that the Naip table is unique in its configuration, but the underlying concept is very much in keeping with the Thraco-Macedonian, Hellenistic, Elite practices. There is a strong emphasis, once more, on Elite feasting, which is often actualized in a funerary sphere, visualized in tomb chambers through architectural configuration, wall decoration, furnishings, burial goods. And in the end, the idea behind the Naip table is quite simple. Something removable, perishable almost, yeah, is fixed in place, made monolithic. So I think there will be more about this in the next presentation. So, but this is a similar phenomenon to, for example, the pillows and the draperies that appear fixed and petrified on burial couches. But of course, at Naip, there is an extra layer of interactivity. Through the duplication, there are both depicted and real objects occupying the same space. As grave goods, they are worth their weight in silver, and of course, they are gifts and everything. But in this setup, then their function and social role is even more pronounced. I agree with Elizabeth Bowen's assessment that the banqueting implements, quote, confirm that this particular kline was conceived as a dining couch. The set of 5 matched fialae also implies that that a single kline can work as a kind of shorthand for symbolic space. Though the deceased may lie alone in his tomb, his couch and accoutrements evoked the convivial banquets in which he partook while alive, and which he may perhaps be imagined as continuing to enjoy in the afterlife. End quote. This observation, I think, can also be developed further. The reclining or enthroned central figure, the owner of the tomb, receives gifts, libations, but feasts are, of course, often reciprocal. And we know that there are some ancient accounts on Thracian and related feasts. They are limited and biased, of course. I won't go deeply into it, like the description of the feasts of Seuthes or Dromihetes. Yet they can still at least reflect real banqueting practices. The host, who not only receives but also distributes goods and gifts, organizes the events, sets the table, literally and symbolically, and of course, in the case of the Naip table, eternally. But before I conclude, I would like to take a very quick look at some other examples of vessels and furniture integrated into tombs from some other regions. One of my favorite monuments ever is the so-called Tomb of Alcaetus in southern Asia Minor, in ancient Termessos. A complex which is a microcosmos cut into rock. There is a heroic rider, armaments, burial couch, baldachin. By the way, we talked about baldachins in the previous session, or previous paper. And there is a cluster of vessels here. There is a cluster of vessels and a 3-legged stool, very badly visible. This is the stool. Here's the reconstruction from Pekridu's book. So yeah, there's this cluster. They are very weathered, but they are impressive imitations of luxury toretics, and large vessels which were actual basins, and one can assume that they played an important role in cleansing rituals or libations, because their placement is conspicuous. They are at the threshold of this grotto-like chamber. And this can be compared to the visual and compositional role of, for example, Kilikeion, that stood on the painted frieze of the Agios Athanasios tomb. Yeah, like right here, dividing the various parts of the work composition. And one can also recall the depicted Periantherion in the tomb of Aeson and Callicles. So these are some other examples of such dividing and importantly placed depictions of furniture and vessels. But in conclusion, I can also say that the Naip table is not simply just like a transitionary or framing element here. It's a focal point in the space of the tomb, on par with the Clinae. It exalted the owner of the tomb as a host who receives and grants honors, and the visualized banquet was easily transformed into the funerary feast and the honorific ritual. And the silver vessels, which might have been looted or misplaced, I think they were well aware of this possibility, but their order, their set in which they are laid out on the table, is encoded into the table's composition. Once more, we see that we see not just imitation, but also like this sort of immortalization and the embodiment of ideas, maybe social order, maybe family relationships into the furniture that stood in the tomb chamber. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Tamás. May we open the floor for questions? I must ask you, in the Kazanlık tomb on the table, are these mussel shells that are depicted?
Let's take a look.
I'm
maybe
taken back to a fabulous meal we had in Sodzapol together.
I don't know. I'm pretty sure I didn't have enough time to really delve into the iconography of the Kazanlık tomb, but maybe somebody knows the exact. I think they might. It might be, but I don't know much about Thracian cuisine. Maybe somebody can attest to this.
A question from Brendan in the back.
Thank you very much. That was extremely interesting. I'm just puzzled. Are there drinking vessels? Actually, I mean, you say vessels; they seem to be.
Yeah.
They call it fiales, but it seems more like they're plates. Are they?
They are. Let me. Where is it? Good. There are fiale. There are, for example, this is a jug. Fiale. 5 fiale were found there. There is a ladle. These were all, and a strain. They were found on the table, and there are more vessels which were found, I think, in the corner of the tomb as well. They are published by Dalman. Yeah.
But does it not seem strange there's nothing for drinking? Because, or maybe not. I don't know. It just seemed like you'd think there'd be drinking.
Fiale they were for drinking.
Yeah.
Yeah. They for a wine set. Yeah.
Oh.
Thank you. Very interesting indeed. It's also a very strange tomb, unusual one. I know it's interpreted as the burial of a Thracian aristocrat, and we have the name Teres, who's very well attested to Grecian name. But again, I think that it's just an idea. I mean, it's more, looks to me more Macedonian. I mean, the choice of architecture is very unusual for an Grecian aristocrat first. Then it's interesting what Brandon just mentioned, the drinking shape, and to expand these plates, these are clearly plates, shapes for eating. That's very unusual for a Thracian burial. I mean, shapes for drinking, pouring liquids, yes, but plates and bowls, that's very rare inside Thracian tombs. Which is different type of feasting. Just an idea.
Yeah, and there's another thing that I'd like to also consider, because the relief, the implements that are made in relief. I used the Dalman's identifications for them. The fish plate really looks like the fish plate, but the others, I think they are more abstracted. They might be something like just projected onto the on like stands or something like projected onto the surface of the table. But this really has to look into it some more. And about whether it's Thracian or not, I think that at this point I tried, although most of the comparenda that I took, they were from Thracian tombs, like from Kazanlık and everything, but I do agree that this tomb, it might not be as strongly Thracian, yes, it's more mixed, it's more Hellenized, more, I don't know, so maybe it's not useful to label it right away as Thracian, but just keep the options open, yeah. So yeah, and we also discussed this inscription. I think yesterday we discussed during lunch the inscription of Teres, which might not be the tomb owner. It might be the original owner of the vessel or somebody who gifted it. So there might have been a much more complex interplay between the local aristocrats. Yeah, thank you.
The explanation that the guy served in the Macedonian army says it's a good explanation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not against the explanation offered by Don. I mean, it's a good version. There's a historically attested, epigraphically attested, I think, because these three sons of Chersobleptes, I think, are in an inscription mentioned. So why not? Yeah.
We had a question from Mantha over here.
Behind you.
Thank you so much for this analysis. I really liked, what you're doing in terms of, the visibility of the table and, the comparanda that you brought in. I'm wondering if I can, kind of challenge that maybe. But the example that you showed from the Alkitas to Intermessos is it's totally petrified. In this case, we have the combination of the two, which is intriguing, right? And you address this. I'm wondering, is there a more mundane, explanation that, the person who made, the table, wanted to make sure that, the person who places the objects, will actually follow that, direct placement, this sort of between making and actual display of the objects, is there is, an intention in that, this is just a thought, maybe there is a practical explanation, I thought, maybe, but it's not, that, I don't agree with your beautiful analysis. But I'm just wondering, there is another way of thinking about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I agree with you, but with the little shift of tone that of course, it's a mundane and practical explanation for a very strict reason. I think this is very hypothetical, but I think the table is set in a specific way for demonstration, of course, as well. But it's also it might have to do something with the number of vessels might have been significant. This is just clearly just like a flight of fancy, but maybe he had 3 sons, maybe he had something like that, or maybe he had 3 comrades back from Alexander's army who he wanted to say that, okay, so this is my table, I sit here sits Teres, here sits Selthus, somebody, yeah. So it might have been a reason to do it like this, because if they just wanted to tell I was having these stupid jokes about the East Thracian catering company who set the table for the feast. If they just wanted to show them, okay, put the main plate here, then the vessel, then the jug here. I don't think you need to go to this extent. They clearly had an idea of how a table should be set in this complaint. So I think, yeah, it's a mundane explanation, but a mundane in a tomb. It's mundane for a tomb, yeah. Like that, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamás. Our final paper of this session will be jointly presented by Dimitra Andrianou, Consuelo Manetta, and Daniela Stoyovana. Dimitra Andrianou is a senior researcher at the National Hellenic Research Foundation at Athens. She graduated from the Department of Archaeology and Art History at the University of Athens and continued her graduate studies as a Fulbright Fellow at the University of Pennsylvania and at Bryn Mawr College. She was a research assistant at the Institute for the Study of Aegean Prehistory and a museum intern at the University of Pennsylvania Museum in Philadelphia. She has received fellowships from the American Research Institute in Turkey, the American School of Classical Studies at Athens, the Fulbright Foundation, and the A.G. Leventis Foundation. Daniela Stoyovana is an assistant professor in the Faculty of History in the Department of Archaeology at Sofia University. Her primary research interests center on the architecture of ancient Thrace and the Greek colonies of the western coast of the Black Sea. Their talk today is titled Furniture and Furnishings in Macedonian and Thracian Funerary Contexts, an Integrated Analysis of Material and Visual Evidence.
Okay, thank you, Sam. And it's my turn to thank Professor Bona Westcott for directing the Getty Travel Seminar and organizing this symposium. Thank you very much, Bona. As far back as 1993, Stella Miller argued that furniture and furnishings were vital evidence in any discussion on burial customs, publishing the evidence from the tomb of Lyson and Callicles at Lefkadia in Macedonia. In her introduction, she highlighted two important aspects of funerary architecture to be investigated in more detail in the coming years. Although studies on furniture were only sporadically emerging by her time, she always insisted that Macedonian burial customs present issues well woven together, and only by studying all the available material and asking the right questions can we get to a point of understanding Macedonian and Thracian, I would add, funerary rites. Macedonian tombs, unlike tombs in the rest of Greece, were equipped with elaborate and costly furniture, and it has been repeatedly argued that the staging of the burial with furniture and furnishings was a way of promoting the ruling class in Macedonian society by means of monumental architecture and meticulously selected offerings. Furniture of various types have been found in Macedonian tombs. Many pieces were made of limestone, marble, or wood, though the latter is harder to document due to its perishable nature. The most constant but not invariable feature in a Macedonian tomb's furnishing is some sort of support for the remains. This usually took the form of a rectangular construction of stone, wood, or sun-dried brick, which often mimicked a clini. Clini of stone were frequently carved in relief and or painted to resemble wooden prototypes, of which most examples have nearly totally disintegrated, leaving only their glass, gold, bone or ivory inlaid decoration. Multiple clini are often arranged to form a pi or gamma around the walls of the burial chamber, especially when the tomb was used for successive burials. Other items of furniture include various combinations of thrones, stools, chests, benches, and pedestals used as offering tables and altars, and also possibly proper tables. The other most notable element of Macedonian tombs is their textile decoration, either as painted motifs evoking textiles or in the form of real textiles used for bedding and hangings. The ceiling of the tomb of Lyson and Callicles that we have already seen at Lefkadia is an excellent example of a painted pattern that derives from a woven fabric. The relationship of the turreted motif in painting and mosaic to weaving has long been recognized and was first studied in some detail by Franz Studinska in connection with the symposium tent of Ptolemy II. Calixenus of Rhodes, quoted in Athenaeus, describes this tent as having a roof draped with a red and white canopy, and the word is uraniskos, painted with a turreted motif, embetasma pyrgoton. Since our last meeting in 2019 in Sofia, our team has been working towards these two interconnected aspects of funerary interiors, namely furniture and furnishings. The Getty Travel Seminar was the perfect opportunity to exchange ideas by comparing and contrasting Macedonian and Thracian archaeological evidence while traveling to relevant sites and museums. Consuelo Manetta, Daniela Stoyovana, and I initially joined forces during the 25th annual meeting of the European Association of Archaeologists in Bern in September 2019. In the session organized by Jeffrey Killen and myself, entitled Furnished Interiors in the Ancient Mediterranean and Egypt, Daniela and Consuelo discussed the types of funerary furniture encountered in ancient Thrace, and I presented a paper on furniture display in Hellenistic and early Roman funerary banquet reliefs.
Adding to the existing study of the Macedonian funerary furniture, primarily by Kostas Sismanidis, and recent international publication of the study of Macedonian and Anatolian furniture in funerary and domestic context, Consuelo and I presented a coincidence classification of evidence gathered from the ancient race. To date, over 40 remains of the actual furniture are known from Bulgaria, as they have been found in measuring graves and chamber tombs in burial mounds dated to between the 5th and the 3rd century BC. They included wooden biers, stone couches, four-leg stools, and footstools of type A, B, and C in Kyrillized typology. As indicated of the map, type A furniture, in Thrace date to between the first half of the 5th century and the last quarter of the 3rd century BC. In addition to the wooden couch from the Tumulus Luzarska, Duvanli, number 1, a stone couch come from the tomb 1 in Ativansky, was wadded number 2. Type A legs also characterize a wooden differs from the caryatid tomb from Svishtari, number 4, compared to the Macedonian silver differs from the Stavropolis, number 3, and a stone differs from the tomb found in the village of Naip in Turkey, you see in previous presentation. A further wooden example, impossible to say whether a cleaner or differus, this direction, was found in the Tumulus Belishka Chuka. This find is important for the understanding of funeral practice in this region in the late classical period, since it was wrapped in the cloth and laid down in the wooden sarcophagus in the same way as other graves goods. Painted version of the type A furniture are found in the main frieze of the tomb of Kazarnak, namely the throne-like chair that held a woman and a silver-footed differus with striped textile covering on which the deceased sat. Their legs present all the distinguished elements that Kyrillus assigned to cleaners, tools, and thrones as they emerged in Greece from the late 6th to the 4th century BC, and which gradually evolved toward more balanced form. In the throne of Kazarnak, more specifically, the lower half of the leg shaft tapered toward the foot, whereas the upper half above the central molded swelling is broader and gently concave and ends with a toe disc capital. This shape is not far from the type of that of type A legs in the cleaner from Duvanli, but form of which had already evolved is comparison to the archaic specimen. Next slide. However, the throne of Kazarnak displays later examples of the type A legs documented in the Mediterranean in the 4th century BC, with more slender legs, a middle torus higher of the legs, and sharply carinated. In contrast, the legs of the differus have multiple turning and terminate in tall and broader elements both above and below. They have parallels in the 4th and 3rd century example, such as a cleaner in the tomb of Amarinthus in Eritrea. Here, the texture of the textile covering painted in the cleaner also resembling the texture of the textile at Kazarnak. The throne of Kazarnak is made of wood, is lacquered and fitted with metal and gilded embellishment. The small sphinxes that supported the armrest were also metal cladding. This motif was common in the classical and early Hellenistic period. There are parallels in the Attic grave stele of the Masistret and the Buscoriale villa. Possible near Earlier Near Eastern Egyptian sources of the Sphinx have been explored, as have its possible connotation of Eastern royalty and luxury. Sphinxes supporting armrests also occur in Attic and Boeotic terracotta figurines, you see, that date to between the end of the 5th and the 3rd quarter of the 4th century BC. Here it is important to note the high backrest is rendered almost identical to the backrest of the Kazanok throne, worked as separate crossbars. Throne-like chairs are also painted in the tomb of Alexandru. As part of the banquet scene, thus included at least 2 persons sitting on throne with high backrest and 2 standing servants. The pain's poor state of preservation makes any attempt to identify the furniture speculative. Only 3 elements can be seen: the protruding ends of the top horizontal and the vertical beams outside the frame of the backrest with palmettes, an armrest and trace of rounded tapering legs. The array of the Kazanok tomb also included 2 footstools. One of the paintings in front of the diffuse and parallel specimens that have been found in the area of Kazanok and elsewhere in Thrace. A second footstool appears in front of the throne. Both are rectangular with 2 horizontal rays resting on small feet molded as lion's paws. A 3-legged table is also painted in front of the diffuse, with such a parallel in the banqueting scene in the tomb of Agios Athanasius and in Emporion vases. Next type. Type B legs appear on throne and cleaner from the 1st quarter of the 6th century BC, and have a rectangular section with semicircular cutouts on each side, often in form of double volutes with palmettes above and below. In Thrace, among others, type B couch included the couch of the tomb of Naip. See the map, and in the previous presentation discussed it. Tomb of Naip, and both stone couches found in the tomb of Caryatides. Sveshtari. Given the decoration of the front and the shape of the legs, the funerary couch was built in 330 to 20 BC, but the north wall of the sarcophagus-like chamber in Tumulus Ostrusha and belonging to type B. Next example. However, some of the elements were borrowed from or are influenced by the decoration of type C couches. The Ostrusha couch is close to the, you see another example, details of the Ostrusha. The Ostrusha couch is close to other cleaner from the Kazanok region, such as the tomb of the Griffin Tumulus and the tomb of Donu Izvuru. I show only the last. There is a footstool in front of the couch. It has parallels in the Griffin Tumulus, Maltepe, Naip, and a footstool painted in front in the diffuse and the central frieze in the Kazanok tomb already discussed. Finally, type C legs represented a development of the type B decoration, and they were used from the end of the 5th to the end of the 3rd century or the beginning of the 2nd century BC. Type C legs are generally simpler than type B and have no decorative reliefs on their fronts. To date, in Bulgarian Thrace, funerary couches with type B decoration occur in 3-chambered tombs. The first come from the tomb in Filipovo area near Plovdiv. Based on the preserved details, the design of this couch may be reconstructed as consisting of the horizontal front slabs, 2 lateral support, a headrest, and stone fill. The silhouette of the legs display a base with the low, truncate, conical plinth and double volute, half-round molding, and a shaft that widened upwards. The couch was part of the original design of the tomb, and 3 finds, a gilded terracotta red, a coin of the Philip III Arideus, and a Thracian amphora stamp indicate that the last burial took place at the beginning of the last decade of the 4th century BC. The tomb and the couch were probably built in the previous decade. Another type C couch existed in the tomb from Donu Izvuru, Kazanok. Its construction comprised of 2 lateral stepped support, horizontal slabs, and monolithic frontal slab. All visible surfaces were covered in white stucco. The main rail between the legs is carved in relief on the frontal slabs. The legs stand on a plinth that turned to the entire length of the slabs. Above it, the profile of the legs formed two double volutes, one above the other, and slightly watering shaft, and the capita of the double volute and tunnel-shaped element without an abacus. 2 footstools are carved below the main rail. Again, they have legs that are bent to the side and end a low pole similar to those already discussed, and also appear with thrones in tomb from Macedonia. The stampation amphora from the last burial dated it to the beginning of the last decade of the 4th century BC. The tomb and the couch are slightly earlier, probably from the preceding decade. Type C couch was also found in the tomb in the Griffin Tumulus, Shipka, and consists of the 2 lateral support, 3 horizontal slabs, and a monolithic frontal slabs. The main rail connected to the legs is carved in the frontal slab. These stand on a low plinth that runs to entire length of the slab. Above the plinth, the silhouette of the legs form a chima reverso profile, a concave section, a double volute and half-round molding. The shaft hoids slightly toward the capital, which consists of the double volute and a bacchus with a cavetto profile. Here, too, a stone footstool stands before the couch, similar to those already discussed. There are evident similarity among this tomb, the tomb of Don Luisvuru, and the couch from the Ostrosha Tumulus, which provide data to date the Griffin Tumulus to the last 2 decades of the 4th century BC.
Another area that was explored in the session furniture was the association of furniture and furnishings with luxury, an idea tightly connected to burial customs. The motivation behind this study was to shed light on an aspect on which the literary sources are virtually silent, namely the private display of furniture by wealthy, non-royal individuals. The presentation explored the extremely scanty excavated domestic material and discussed methodological ways to go around the problem, maintaining that understanding luxurious furniture in domestic settings is key to understanding furniture in tombs. We are aided in this by iconography, and particularly by a group of Hellenistic reliefs known as the Funerary banquet reliefs from Asia Minor and the North Aegean. Banquets provide a prime opportunity to demonstrate elegance and taste in food and drink, but also to show off objects from the host collections, especially those related to dining. As in life, reliefs depicting funerary banquets were similarly an opportunity for display, as they allude to scenes of everyday life. Usually centered around a couch with reclining male or males and 1 or 2 female figures seated in profile on either side of the couch. These reliefs possibly show the deceased in a domestic setting. Moreover, certain details on the reliefs from the North Aegean and especially from the island of Samos may indicate the wealth of the household. Those who commissioned such detailed furniture on the funerary reliefs were playing with the idea of private domestic display and consequently the wealth of the deceased through a careful selection of real furniture types. Textual indications for this private wealth, particularly on Samos, comes from the account of the sack of the island by the Roman magistrate Gaius Verres in 80 BC. Samos is reported by the ancient authors as especially rich. It thus appears that the wealth depicted on these particular reliefs is real and not aspired luxury. One of the most straightforward examples of exceptional furniture being displayed is the depiction of a seat with a raised back, often decorated with an open-work design, conventionally called a throne in scholarship, and in its early iconography apparently used exclusively for royalty or deities. The only mention of a throne, though of unknown type, in a private setting is in the epigraphical source of the confiscated property of Alcibiades and his followers, dated to the 5th century BC, whereas excavated examples are associated with royalty or priestesses, such as the well-known marble thrones from Vergina, dated to the beginning of the 3rd century BC. The throne in the so-called Romeo's tomb on your left has a back divided into 9 rectangular panels, originally decorated with painted stars, while the throne at the Bella Tumulus on your right has a painted version of the same open-work design. Interestingly enough, this type of seat is also evidenced on a small group of 2nd century BC banquet reliefs from Samos and Byzantium, belonging to ordinary, that is, non-royal individuals. The female figures on either side of the Cluny are not seated on simple stools, but on thrones with a raised back, purposefully shown in a 3/4 view, something which is uncommon on reliefs, in order to accentuate the design of the furniture piece. Sometimes they're even shown frontally in a specially defined space, judging from the curtain or wall in the background. Thus, a type of seat earlier connected with royalty or deities is now a display item, possibly in private settings. It is, after all, a well-established fact that wealthy individuals tend to mimic the habits of royalty in their private lifestyle. On another relief from Samos, the left figure is further accentuated by a podium on which both her seat, this time a stool, and her footstool stand. Apart from emphasizing the figure, this podium may also serve a practical purpose, possibly protecting the expensive metal fittings of the stool's legs from abrasion, since the banquet apparently takes place in the open air, maybe in a courtyard. A second example of luxurious furniture used in private life appears in a group of reliefs from Samos, Klazomenai, and Smyrna, where the elaborate leg of the Cluny is accentuated by depicting the valance or bedsheet in such a way that it is raised or folded to reveal the leg. These are no ordinary legs, but legs carved with sphinxes, certainly luxurious designs in themselves. They are named in the textual and epigraphical sources as sphigopodes, expensive items known as possessions of the Delian sanctuaries. A sphinx leg of this type was found in a shipwreck off the island of Styra in the South Euboean Gulf, dated by the finds between the late 2nd and early 1st century BC. Once again, the furniture on display in these funerary banquet scenes seems to reflect actual household possessions. Additionally, the valance that turns at the edge to exhibit the sphinx leg of the Cluny may be the amphitapis mentioned again on the Attic stelae. Interpreted as a double-faced covering, its depiction here may prove its value. Textiles play a major role in display, adding to the artistic and monetary value of furniture. A third type, the kilikion, or a third example, a kilikion or cupboard, was a display item par excellence. Completely absent from classical vase iconography, the kilikion appears on a small group of so-called Greco-Persian reliefs from the 5th century, the wall painting in the tomb of Agios Athanasios in Thessaloniki. It becomes especially beloved on Samian, Kizikian, and Teian banquet reliefs, and disappears by the imperial period. This short-lived piece of furniture is mentioned in Calixenus' account of Ptolemy II as one of the items carried in the parade, thus used by royalty. But it also appears in a domestic setting in Theophrastos' characters dated after 317 BC, where the distrustful man asks his wife repeatedly if the coffer, kivoton, is locked, the cupboard, kilikuchion, sealed, and the house door bolted. In Hellenistic banquet reliefs, the kilikion is placed on one side of the Cluny, and a servant usually stands next to it. On 2 examples, the servant is behind the kilikion, either for lack of space or in order to exhibit the cupboard in its entire length. On this example, the kilikion is even carved on the side frame of the stele on the pilaster, an area that is usually left undecorated. Stepped kilikia are depicted even empty or half empty, possibly indicating that the vessels are in use during the banquet. Sometimes the same scene includes both stepped kilikia and architectural kilikia with columns. Another elaborate piece of furniture depicted on funerary reliefs is the one-legged table. The example on your screen is unique because it shows a sole female figure next to a table without a male figure reclining on the couch. According to the inscription, the relief is dedicated by a certain Iulianos to his Thracian mother-in-law Vendi, apparently depicted. Note the elaborate cushion on which the figure sits and the sculpted one-leg table. Finally, thick mattresses appear on a series of 2nd century AD reliefs from Odessos in modern Bulgaria. These types of mattresses bear an intriguing detail that indicates either early upholstery, an assertion that may raise many eyebrows, but it's not utterly impossible, or a neatly folded textile. If upholstered, small wooden pegs placed at regular intervals, as the modern example on the screen, may have secured the fabric to the stuffed mattress, thus creating the radial folds visible on the relief. If folded, it is likely that a cloth press would have been used. Contemporary evidence from Pompeii, such as metal fittings of a press in a foolery, and a painting of a cloth press, and from Herculaneum a reconstruction of what must be the carbonized pieces of a cloth press, all support the view that textiles were tightly folded. The short-lived but ever so eloquent banquet reliefs from Samos, Klazomenai, and Teos, rich in furniture, borrow to my mind from representations of private space and display furniture in order to highlight status. The idea of furniture display will become more prominent in the Roman period as interest in legally or illegally obtained collections of art increases. A notable example is the expensive table bought by Cicero, an ardent art collector, mentioned by Pliny. By the Roman period, more and clearer references to expensive furniture and furnishings in private houses emerge, while the wave of emulative behavior apparent in Republican Rome demonstrates how certain objects become invested with new meaning beyond their ostensible functional one, proof of the high socioeconomic position of their owners. Furniture display in the iconography of funerary reliefs brought me back to my older study of furnishings, this time focusing on funerary contexts, both in terms of actual excavated examples and iconography. As a member of Euroweb Cost Action since 2020, I strove to collect the evidence of extant funerary textile furnishings, namely textiles other than garments, and other items made of organic materials such as reeds, leather, seaweed, branches, and flowers, with the aim to understand their use and significance in the burial ritual. Euroweb fosters a pan-European network of scholars and stakeholders from academia, museums, conservation, cultural, and creative industries. Scholars from several disciplines of the humanities, social sciences, and natural sciences join forces to bridge current cultural, political, and geographical gaps and facilitate interdisciplinary research, leading to inspirational material for experts in the allied and applied disciplines of fashion, art, and design. Within Euroweb framework, I examined various aspects of funerary textiles, and especially their significance in burial customs in Macedonia and Thrace. The extant evidence proves that textiles, other than covers for the deceased, were used to wrap the bones inside the funerary urn, wrap the exterior of the urn itself, wrap individual offerings, cover the funerary bed, serve as a mattress on the floor in the absence of a clini, and decorate the funerary chamber. Presently, I will restrict myself to the evidence related to funerary hangings, bedding, and fragrant organic materials. Regarding hangings, a good example can be seen in modern Bulgaria, in the cis grave of the tumulus of Goliamata Mogila, dated to the mid-4th century BC. Here, fibers preserved on bent nails in the burial chamber suggest that real textiles were hung from the walls. The wooden ceiling of the tomb was also covered by a textile to prevent soil and small stones from falling in. In Macedonia, the well-known example from the so-called Sotiriades tomb at Dion, dated to the last quarter of the 4th century BC, has a painted version of a textile canopy over the clini, decorated with a motif of walking lions. Its iconography has been compared to the animals on the carpet found in the Scythian burial Pazyryk Mound 5, dated to the 4th or 3rd century BC, and closer to us, the walking animal, possibly a lion, on the linen textile found inside a bronze caldpiece covering the remains of the deceased in a 5th or 4th century tomb at Koropi. The latter is the first known example of embroidery in Greece with the use of gilded silver threads around an organic core. The Sotiriades tomb also had nails in the wall over the clini, possibly for securing an actual textile or for suspending offerings. Thus, this tomb shows the coexistence of painted and real hangings, or a real textile used as a backdrop for displaying offerings. Also, in Tomb 3 at Vergina, traces of porphyry on the wall over the clini have recently been interpreted as an indication of a suspended cloth. What is the significance of textile hangings in tombs? Do they imitate a domestic environment by adding warmth and softness to the interior? Practically shield the funerary offerings from dust and insects? Adorn the room as a backdrop for the display of suspended objects? Give a sense of solemnity, opulence, and intimacy, or fulfill a yet unknown symbolic funerary purpose? Evidence is still tentative. Regarding funerary bedding, various pieces of evidence suggest the use of real pillows and real bed covers. 6 small gold bells found scattered around the wooden funerary clini in the thalamus of Tomb Alpha at Katerini, dated to the 3rd quarter of the 4th century BC, constitute evidence of disintegrated bedding. The bells, equipped with a small suspension loop at one end and an inner clapper, would have been sewn onto the edges of a cover to create sound. Remains of pillows were found in Tomb 2 at Vergina, where, according to Manolis Andronikos' excavation notebooks, traces of feathers were preserved. More evidence for pillows was discovered in tombs at Volos and Larissa in Thessaly. The reeds found in the chamber tomb Epsilon at Rachona have been interpreted as remains of a mattress. Large numbers of beads found near funerary clini also indicate another kind of clini decoration. At Enia, for example, 103 perforated gilded clay beads were found scattered around the clini. Based on the shape and size, we can restore the original place around the clini. They were possibly threaded to form a garland that would also create sound as it moved, like the example depicted in a painting on the cis grave of ancient Lyti, dated to the end of the 4th or the beginning of the 3rd century BC. In northern Pieria, perforated astragals and gilded buttons were found in a number of cis graves and should be restored in the same manner. Such a restoration may also explain the holes on the clini depicted on this 2nd century BC funerary banquet relief from Philippi, possibly originating from the western cemetery of the city. Sound was apparently tightly connected with burial practice. Finally, fragrant organic materials such as real wreaths hanging on the walls and flower bouquets placed on the clini form exceptional examples that speak to elusive funerary rites. In a few cases, real flower wreaths were placed on top of cremated remains, with a textile covering both the remains and the wreath, as at Kalivia in Attica. Inside a Rocca tomb at Veria, traces of a flower bouquet were found on the clini, placed next to the deceased, while the disintegrated remains of a plant were found inside a bronze inokoi in a cist grave at Liti. Real flower garlands left traces on the stucco of the walls of Tomb 3 at Vergina, as proven by a recent study. Fragrant organic material would emphasize the idea of rebirth, where the smell of nature becomes the smell of hope. Furniture and furnishings in Hellenistic tombs of Macedonia and Thrace show the care that the living provided for the dead, and at the same time testify to yet unknown stages of the burial practice and beliefs in the afterlife more generally. Beyond indications of conspicuous consumption, they are also an indispensable part of funerary customs. They transmute into sensory cues of the personal, evocative memories that the deceased will take with him or her into the other world. Since these tombs are never to be visited again, the relatives seal the tomb with the feeling of comfort that their beloved ones will lack nothing. Furniture and furnishings relate to the senses that trigger emotions, creating memories for the relatives that stage the funeral. The journey to the unknown becomes less frightening both for the deceased and the people left behind, as if, being wrapped in familiar possessions, sounds, sights, and smells, allowed some sort of continuing existence in the afterlife. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. So interesting. I wanted to ask about the tables, actually, about the tables with the metal vessels. As far as I remember, in Tomb 3 in Vergina, there used to be a table, wooden table with the vessels on it.
This is a very big question mark. That's why I said we don't know if we have tables in Macedonian tombs. We don't know if we have tables in general in tombs.
So it's not common, it's not widespread to have tables, marble probably or something.
No, no, not at all. This table that you're referring to from Vergina, it's a wooden table, and it's assumed by the what remained, but we are not certain about. This is the only example that we have, if this is true.
And
but
the trace as well.
You know, we are waiting for the Vergina publication for further information.
And the traces in Thrace as well, we do not have tables. I mean, except Naip, very little. Okay.
So it's only your table.
Okay.
The Naip,
Okay,
the Naip table.
Thank you so much.
This is a nice table, laden with fruits and.
Thank you so much for this great overview. I'm just wondering, and partly this comes from my not coming from your field and understanding the particulars of the trade in the region. You showed this exchange of iconography and how this common iconography that appears in this region. Is there any way that we know further about itinerant workshops, connections? Daniela is doing this work. Have we, do we know the origin of, the materials? I mean, I'm just trying to put some links between Macedonia and Thrace, maybe more, in a more concrete way, or in some way that we can say, how do these ideas, images, communicate, in the region? Yeah, I'm sorry.
I don't have an answer of this question.
We're both looking at each other. This is why we formed this group, I assume, so we can be in contact and look into it a little more, because the Thracian material is something that I need to look into more closely. We need time to answer this question, especially related to workshops and furthermore itinerant workshops, or sculptors traveling to one place or the other. And I have to tell you that, for example, if you're referring to funerary banquet reliefs, for example, you're referring to furniture. These reliefs, are just a parenthesis, are only found on the coastal part of Thrace, not inland. So it's a colony thing. It's a colony iconography for Thrace.
Like, I was thinking, looking at the Styra shipwreck, I'm thinking there must be more information now from shipwrecks, right? Now that, Daniela is doing this, detailed work, when, one does analysis, one can see provenance of materials, then we can see more that, network of exchange in a more concrete way. It was when I saw the Styra shipwreck, I was like, we must have more material now, so in order to be answering that question. And then Daniela's work with the objects. I'm thinking about movable objects, and people thinking of the comment of Natalia in the morning that the material, the workmen go with the material. And so I'm thinking, can we entertain that thought further in your in the context that you have, what Natalia said in the morning about that the marble does not go on its own, that will go with craftsmen with it. And so we have here movable objects, we see iconography circulating, we don't have answers, I'm sure, but are there, I'm sure that you have thought and entertained, certain directions, maybe
from my
you wanted
work,
to share.
From my work on the reliefs, so we're jumping now to another category of objects, but to answer your question, the reliefs from the coastal area of Thrace, I think, are made locally. We have no reason to believe that there were artists coming from Thassos. It may be the case for some, but that's where the marble analysis and the iconographic analysis come to play in order to be able to give a better answer for that. But I always believe in local workshops. So I think of local workshops, I should say. I put it nicely. I always think of local workshops first, because it's a production that needs to it's local, and they need people to work on it.
Thank you. With the Sphinx Cline leg, I was wondering if you think that comes from a couch that had fulcrum attachments that you see in the later Hellenistic and Roman period.
I'm sorry, that had?
Fulcrum attachments like mules or horses up on the end, and on the reliefs, if any of those Cline would have been that type, and if so, if you would have seen them with the textiles.
Yeah, I showed Sphinx legs on the reliefs.
But if the top of that would have had ornaments on it.
Okay, since the Sphinx leg I showed you is the only example that we have, we can only speculate, but I can show you a Sphinx leg. This one, is it? Maybe I should give you one. This one. Mm-hmm. Okay. You see the construction. It's a bell-shaped. This is one of the possible ways that the Sphinx can be attached on the leg. So you see a bell-shaped end of the leg,
and then the top.
The Sphinx, and there are a number of tori over it that gets to the frame of the Cline.
Okay.
So this is a possible construction. The whole thing is that we thought for many years that this is the imagination of the artist. So having found the evidence from Styra, It was great.
Thank you.
So I don't know if I answered the
Yes.
entire question.
Well, what does the pillow rest? Is there a construction up there too?
Okay, here probably not.
Okay.
Here there are two pillows, one on top of the other, or one pillow that is folded.
Okay.
You are referring to the fulcrum?
Yes.
Okay, the fulcrum is a little later than
Okay.
these dates, and when you have a fulcrum, usually you don't have a pillow.
Okay.
But I still need to work on it to be sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question which you may well rightly dismiss as overly imaginative.
Dismissed.
You concluded with an appeal to the wider array of senses in the things interred in these tombs, to sound elements, but also to aromatic botanical things like garlands and the like. I'm reminded of the fact that the Gordian tumulus, has beams of cedar wood that still smell like cedar, and that Herodotus describes cedar oil as a key ingredient in Egyptian burials, and that many of these, especially the painted thrones, show scarf joints of different kinds of wood being combined in a mosaic. Is there a possibility that these forms of furniture provide a feast for the senses beyond simply the visual?
Could very well be. Yeah, if you get into the sensory scholarship and the idea, if you keep reading about senses in archaeology, it's something that probably was sought by ancient Greeks and Anatolians. Again, the tomb is exceptional. It's one of a kind. And the work that has been done is one of a kind. Yeah, it could very well be. I think we're now getting to understand all the parameters in the funeral burial, and this is actually what I was trying to do for the last years, and see how smells also play a role. Yeah, and they have some kind of symbolic significance for as long as they last.
If there are no more questions, let us thank our speakers from this panel and adjourn for lunch.
Thank you. Oh, well, I want to congratulate our speakers for ending 6 minutes early or so, which gives me, and I won't therefore take more than that, but it is always nice to wrap things up and to reflect on what we set out to do and what we've accomplished. I know the group will talk further about plans, but just to say a word about the symposium and great thanks. I want to say we've had a really nice group in the room every day, but I would also want to share with you that there were 1,900 people online. So the word got out over the course of these 3 days of what you have been working on. So I think that's great. I remember I had that list of ideas that the seminar put together in Sofia in 2019 of things that they wanted to work on. And one of the ideas was, architectural interactions across diverse ethnic and political communities. And I think we touched on Macedonians, Thracians, Scythians, Carians, and Greeks from Ionia, from Aegean, Thrace, from other parts of the mainland. So I think we really did look at a wide range of ethnic communities and their interactions. We talked about the adaptation and persistence of traditions in the face of geographic diversity. And of course, Anka really led us off with the rich and complex geographies of this region. We were also saw that connectivity through Musa's paper, looking at roads and bridges as well. Divine divine, that's next. It's design, confluences and divergences. Again, we were always talking about this. I think there wasn't a paper that didn't look at this tension and interaction between where things come together and where they break apart. But I think of Phil and Chavdar and Plamena were really looking really carefully at these kinds of issues. And then we almost didn't talk very much about cult until Emil came through for us, looking at potential cults of Pistiros that we should be looking for. Architecture of death had a very large part in our discussions, including the paper we just heard now from Ademi and Daniela, but also Consuelo talking about funerary, coffer systems, Tamás on funerary, that incredible table, Nadia on the painted interiors, and I'm sure I'm missing out on many others, but that seems really to have been a major theme in terms of construction as well, with Phil and with Roman. And then I should have also mentioned under design confluences of all the roofing work, so that are all of our technologies of construction. Phil, Sam, and Jacques and Roman were all interested in technologies of really rather remarkable variety that we find in this region. And in terms of transporting ideas and materials across regions, I think Natalia really showed us how complex things can be, and I have to completely revise my understanding of the Temple of the Great God at Histria, which I always had said is a Thracian donor, a Thracian design, and Thracian material, and now I realize I need to say maybe Thracian donor, but Pergamene design and Proconnesian material. These are just a few thoughts that I'm writing down, and I hope I've actually captured each one of your papers in various ways, and I'm sure that others have heard and thought of much more. I'd be happy to open the floor to other thoughts about where the conference has taken us, but I just want to offer my sincere thanks to everybody for their work and their contributions. Anyone else have a word to wrap up, or are we good?
Let's see. There are no Q&A questions for this session.
The internet is satisfied.
Individual speakers have thanked Vana for her hard work, but I think all of us here should thank Vana very much for her hard work, particularly because this is happening in the first 6 or 7 months of her directorship here, which has a way of keeping her busy. So let's give Vana a round of applause.
Thank you so much. Well, again, thanks very much, and we look forward to keeping in touch.